Pensions Committee, which is open to the press and public on request. This meeting will not be broadcast live. However, a recording will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. Please be aware that this meeting is being transcribed only for the purpose of producing the minutes. This transcript will be deleted once the committee approves the minutes. The transcript should not be downloaded by anyone other than members of Democratic Services. We welcome the use of Welsh language at meetings. I have had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind members that as per statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government (Wales) Measure of 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by the members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask that you all please use your cameras for the duration of the meeting. Please can members attending via Microsoft Teams refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. Please remember to keep your microphone muted when you are not talking. So, moving on to the agenda. Agenda item 1 is attendance and apologies. Over to Jade.
Thanks, Chair. We've not had any apologies this morning.
Thank you very much. I think Alfie's on his way, he told me, so I can leave apologies for lateness. There he is. Almost saved by the bell. So no apologies for lateness for Alfie as he's just walked in. Item number 2, declaration of interests. Again, over to Jade.
Thanks, Chair. So starting with Councillor Best, please can I just confirm that you have no interests?
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Councillor Hall, I have that you're a contributor to the fund.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Keat, just to confirm there are no interests? Thank you. Councillor 2, could I just check whether anyone of your close family members are in receipt of a pension or a contributor to the fund?
Yeah, I am.
Could I just check who those family members are, please?
It's to me and my ex-wife, but just me.
Is that contributor or in receipt of pension?
A receipt.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, just to check, I've got yourself and your wife both in receipt of a pension and contributors to the fund?
That's correct.
Thank you. And yourself, Chair, I have that your father and 2 other family members are in receipt of a pension and you're a contributor to the fund?
Yeah, that's also correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jade. Next, there is agenda item number 3, minutes of the Pensions Committee from the 9th of June 2025. This is for members to raise any issues and to agree the minutes, starting on page 5. I assume everyone's read the minutes. Does anybody have any issues they'd like to raise? No, in which case, can members please agree those minutes? Agreed? Everyone? Fantastic. Thank you very much. Next item's agenda item number 4, this is for information only. These are the draft minutes of the Pension Board meeting of the 30th of July 2025, starting on page 19. I'm happy to take any queries or questions for Alex and other officers to reply to. Any queries? In which case, everyone happy to note these minutes? Excellent, fantastic. They are duly noted. Moving on then to agenda item number 5. This is the administration update, starting on page 33, to be report written, submitted and delivered by Joanne Griffiths, the Pensions Manager.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start on this report on point 4, My Pensions Online. So I'm pleased to inform you that on the 6th of August this year, the fund launched a new My Pensions Online system. So in addition to the existing functionality, the new system provides a fresh new look, enhanced security, fast registration for members, a retirement planner, and also video annual benefit statements. As part of the implementation, all employers were notified of the new system on the 5th of August, and they were requested to disseminate information to their members. And week commencing the 11th of August, the Fund sent out emails to all members with a registered email address, notifying them about the new system and informing them that their annual benefit statements are available online. This was followed up then week commencing the 18th of October, where we carried out a similar process for all members without email addresses. And we sent to members letters in the post notifying of the new system and details about their annual benefit statements. As part of the new My Pensions Online system, members who were previously registered on the old system were required to re-register to take advantage of the new enhanced security functionality. If you look at the table on 4.5, you'll be able to see, as of the 22nd of September, the total number of members registered on My Pensions Online, which is 28,479. And also the column next to that is the total number of members registered on the new My Pensions Online system, where we've got 10,482. So in total, we've got just over 42% of members registered for My Pensions Online. And out of that 42%, 36.8% have registered for the new My Pensions Online system. So we're really pleased with the uptake of this new system, and we've received good reviews from members who have logged in and used it. In December, we'll be sending out newsletters to all pensioner and dependent members with their annual Grapevine newsletter, which will include more information about My Pensions Online and how to register for the system. And over the next 6 to 12 months, we'll be emailing members who haven't yet migrated to the new system, asking them to register for this new system. So all in all, the uptake has been very good, and we have a plan in place to try and increase the number of members registered to the new system. Moving on then to point 5, the triennial valuation. So this is now underway, having commenced on the 31st of March. Valuation data was submitted to the actuary on the 8th of July. However, this year it was more complex owing to the additional information required to form a cloud. Issues were identified with the valuation extracts, and we had to have a patch installed to fix this. However, despite this, we managed to successfully submit the data to the actuary by the 11th of July within the deadline. The next part of this report discusses cybersecurity. So our Chief Information Security Officer, Cathy Buckley, has left her role, left it at the end of August, and we're in discussions with Torfaen Council to see who will succeed her in this role. Considering her departure, the Fund decided to bring forward its annual tabletop exercise with Hayward Pension Technologies from December to July. The purpose of the tabletop exercise is to ensure resilience and provide reassurance of stakeholders on the measures in place for cybersecurity. So following the exercise, the Chief Information Security Officer believed that all attendees portrayed the knowledge required of their areas. Hayward Pension Technology had the correct policies and procedures in place, and no issues were identified. Moving on then to internal audit. So an internal audit of the pension fund took place in June this year, and audit evaluated the Council's control environment and exposure to governance, operations and information systems risks. The audit concluded and stated in the management letter that full assurances were provided, and the full assurances definition can be seen in point 7.3. That's very pleasing for the Fund's administration. The next area is MacLeod. So the Local Government Pension Scheme Amendment number 3 regulations came into force on the 1st of October 2023, which implemented the MacLeod remedy. And this is backdated to the 1st of April 2014. In June 24, the Ministry of Housing and Communities and Local Government issued some statutory guidance which supported authorities in the implementation of MacLeod, and stated that for most members, the MacLeod implementation period ends on the 31st of August 25, which was just gone. At the end of this period, they would expect that all retrospective amendments to members' pensions had been completed, and records for members who qualify for MacLeod but hadn't yet taken their pension, so active and deferred members, were correctly displayed in the annual benefit statements. In August, MHELG laid Information Regulations 2024, which covered annual benefit statements, and this removed the requirement to reflect MacLeod protections in the 2024 statements and provided a discretion not to reflect MacLeod protections in the 2025 statements for individual members or groups. If a fund wanted to exercise these discretions, they had to make the decision before the 31st of August. They could only be made if it was reasonable, and for a particular group of members or class of members, and members must be notified of this before or during the annual benefit statements of 2025. In June 2025, the pension regulator also issued its own guidance and stated that if funds wanted to use its discretion, that they had to gain the view of the local pension board. A written record of the decision to exercise the discretion had to be kept, and a clear and realistic plan had to be put in place to make sure that the MacLeod was reflected in members' statements by 2026. So, having considered this guidance, the funds made a determination to use discretions for a certain group of people, and a report was taken to the local pension board in July to seek their views. And during the meeting, the local pension board supported officers' decision to utilise this discretion. So the discretions being used are for a group of members, which include members with a pension debit. This is because the regulations don't currently allow for that. Members with a club transfer in, as the fund software provider doesn't yet currently allow notional final salary service in the remedy period to be recorded. Members with remedial service, a service between the 1st of April 14 and 31st of March 22, who have transferred in from a different public service pension scheme. And members who joined the LGPS after age 65 who transferred in remedial service, because the regulations once again don't allow for that to be taken into consideration. So, as part of the annual benefit process this year, the fund included details about these discretions and a fact sheet in the annual benefits statements that were sent to members.
I'll take the questions at the end.
The next part of this report looks at the pension dashboard. So the pension dashboard is a government initiative designed to help individuals access information about their pensions all in one place. And the LGPS is required to connect to the dashboard by the 31st of October 2025, so the end of this month. The fund needs to have an integrated service provider to connect to the dashboard, and the fund has selected Hayward Pension Technologies, and I believe this was covered in a report that was brought through committee in the last quarter. So just a few updates on the dashboard. So we've received our registration codes from the pension regulator, and we submitted our onboarding request for the Money and Pension Service, and this was approved on the 1st of July. Just a note about AVCs. Along with the pension details that the fund holds, the fund is also responsible for ensuring that AVC data is also available on the pension dashboard. The fund has 3 AVC providers: Clerical, Medical, Standard Life and Utmost, and they've all made contact with the fund. There's 2 ways that information can be uploaded to the dashboard for AVCs. So a multiple source linked, where the AVC provider provides the information directly to the dashboard, and single source, where the AVC provider provides the information to the fund and the fund submits it as part of its scheme data. So 2 of our AVC providers, Clerical, Medical and Standard Life, will be sending information directly to the dashboard, and Utmost will be using the single source and providing us with the data for us to upload to the system. So we continue conversations with the ABC providers to ensure that they can meet the deadline of the 31st of October. Just mentioning a matching criteria as well. So when a member uses the pension dashboard, the fund will receive certain data from the digital architecture, and the fund will need to use this data to search its records to determine if it's got a match. So the fund needs to decide what data it's going to use for matching members. Possible data is forename, surname, date of birth, email address, NI number, etc. So in 2022, the Pension Administration Standards Association, PASA, released some guidance on the Data Matching Convention, which has been incorporated into our current ISP. However, in July, they've issued an updated edition, reflecting developments within the industry. So the ISP will incorporate these changes in a future upgrade, and we'll present a paper to Pensions Committee about the matching criteria after we've reviewed this, the updates and the functionality within the ISP. And just the last point on dashboards is data cleansing. Data is of utmost importance with the pension dashboard because if we hold incorrect data, members won't be able to match their data with ourselves, and that will cause additional work for the fund, and it could affect members not being able to access their pensions in a timely manner. So as a result, we've purchased Hayward's Pension Technologies data cleansing solution. So this will look at our data and review it against credit reference data sources to ensure that we've got accurate records, and we'll be able to enrich our data, especially around mobile phone numbers and email addresses, which we don't necessarily hold for everybody. So that project is underway, and that will be an ongoing exercise. We'll receive this information on a monthly basis. We'll be able to cleanse our data on a monthly basis going forward. And the final point on this report is just to mention Pension Awareness Week. So Pension Awareness Week is a national event that takes place annually, and this year it took place between the 15th and 19th of September, and it aims to help individuals better understand their pension and take proactive steps towards securing their financial future. So as part of the Pension Awareness Week, the fund created a brand new page on its website and engaged with all its employers, asking them to share information about the Pension Awareness Week to their staff. The fund also developed some presentations on an introduction to LGPS and why join the LGPS and topping up pensions. And the fund also informed employers that we could also run one-to-one events for their members. So at the request of Torfaen Council, the Pension Fund delivered 2 online team sessions to staff and one one-to-one event. And a total of 261 members from Torfaen County Borough Council participated. Following the campaign and information we sent to employers, the fund is also in discussion with other employers to carry out similar events with their organisations. So I invite any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Joanne. In particular, I'd like to sort of congratulate you on the cyber security desktop, tabletop exercise, especially having to do it in a much shorter time frame than the normal. And also say it's really encouraging to see that finally the wheels seem to be turning on the pensions dashboard. McLeod remains McLeod. It strikes me quite interesting. I'm hoping that by the end of this term we get some positive outturns on both of those things. I'm pretty sure you've got them off your desk as well. Questions from the committee. I know David indicated, so I'll take David's questions now.
Thank you, Chair. John, I'm making the assumption that the deferral around the McLeod statement means that it does have to be in the next statement. Is there a deadline for us to get this done by ahead of statement preparation?
Yes, you're correct. If we use a discretion, they have to be completed by the 31st of August 2026. With two of the members or groups of members that are excluded, we're waiting on legislation changes. So we are in the hands of the government in that sense, and to know when those regulations come into force. With the other two, we are proactively trying to gather that information, and we have put a plan in place with deadlines that we're working towards to make sure that everything is in place by the time we run the annual benefit statements next year, around July time next year.
Can I just come back quickly? I think obviously it would be helpful to be made aware if this looks likely to not be met in terms of the timescales. I'm just highlighting a potential risk for us to be aware of in the Pensions Committee. And again, just clarification, I'm assuming then that it is only a relatively small number that you've had to do the deferment for, so therefore the majority is not an issue. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question, but any other committee members wish to add anything? Right, mine's getting into the weeds of a question, actually. So on paragraph 4, looking at the information you provided about the My Pensions Online, it's just a question about the figures you're quoting. What proportion of the registrations are duplicates? Because presumably there will be a proportion of people who were already signed up for on the old system who've now signed up to the new system. So I'm just wondering whether we might need to go back and sort of have a slightly more sophisticated understanding of those percentages, because actually, I guess the question is, of those percentages, how many of those people are potentially being double counted? I.e., I haven't, well, I might have done. I have signed up for the existing platform, for example, but if I've also signed up for the new platform, are you double counting me in these figures? I haven't signed up for the new one yet, but I will go back and make sure I do it before the end of the week.
I think, if I'm right now saying, in the third column across, 22nd of September, total registration, so that would include everybody who has signed up to the to My Pension Online. Yeah. And then the next column along is just the ones that have signed up to the new system. So they haven't been, the 22nd of September 2025 isn't double counting members who have signed up on both.
So the third column is 10,000 completely new people?
No.
No. What would be good then if we could come back again next month and just dig into some of those percentages? Because I think maths is never my strong point, but I'm pretty sure that some of these figures might unintentionally be misleading, and actually the percentage we've actually got enrolled would be a bit under what we're suggesting it might be.
Okay.
Alex.
Sorry, just coming on that. So I think my interpretation of this, and we will definitely clarify, is that the existing system that has been discontinued had the 28,000 members as of 22nd of September. Yeah. But because the new system was being rolled out, there was a need for all of those existing members to re-register, and so the final column, the 10,400, captures the number of individuals or members of the scheme that had signed up at that point in time. So I think that 10,000 isn't a duplicate, it's just on the new system we only have just under 10,500 members as of 22nd of September, which is perhaps expected given that we're onboarding to a new system. So what we hope, and our intention, is that we will return to a figure similar to the 28,500 and grow that. Our target in the business plan is 40% and rising, so we're looking to capture more of the membership, but we will confirm those figures.
If you could, that would be helpful. It's unusual for me to get into the weeds like that, so talking weeds over to David.
Thank you for the introduction, Chair. Just to say that at 9.12, you've mentioned about incorporating changes in the future upgrade. I think that's been very helpful just to reinforce that, particularly because at 9.10 it says the funds decide what data to use for matching members to pension. So presumably there'll be some exploratory work that you will then present to us to sort of say these are the kind of things. So I'll just sort of power to your elbow in terms of putting a report to us next time, which I'm sure will be to the delight of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If everyone's happy then, can I please draw members' attention to paragraph 12.1 on page 39. That is that the Pension Committee is asked to note the content of the report. Everybody happy to note the report? Excellent, fantastic, thank you very much. Moving on then to item number 6, which I'm giving, I believe, correct? So, this is item number 6, is towards the Wales-wide exclusion framework and consideration of Gwent local authority motions. I've actually prepared a statement that I'm going to read out, but before I do, I'm just going to quickly go through the cover paper just to set out what we're hoping to achieve here. So, paragraph 2, the purpose of the report is essentially I want to update people on conversations that have been ongoing across Wales about this issue of exclusions for some time now. But then also for us to take a view on the motions we've received recently from both Monmouthshire and Newport County Borough Councils, both of whom are, as we know, are employers and underlying authorities within this scheme. Those motions were both passed by the respective councils last month, and we received them both in time to take a view at this committee meeting. So, if members can indulge me, I have got a statement I'm going to read out, so I'm going to stop at various points in the statements to have a discussion if we wish to have one. I think basically, so I've prepared some remarks for today, and I've grouped these into 3 subject areas. The first relates to the creation of a robust Wales-wide investments exclusions policy, something that we've been working on across the WPP privately, and I must admit, at times painfully slowly for the past 12 to 15 months. The genesis of this work came from the collective frustration of fund chairs and the scheme member representative at the absence of any institutional mechanism to withdraw investments from companies that contravene our climate change aspirations and may have serially ignored our efforts to engage with them on these issues. So just to unpack that, what I mean is the WPP currently has both a policy and a framework for engagement, but it possesses neither a comprehensive policy nor a comprehensive framework to manage exclusions, nor the withdrawal of investments if and when this course of action is deemed necessary. And I think as Alex can attest, having been in these meetings, this is something we really have kicked around back and forth with our external advisors over the past 12 months. But at the last gathering of the WPP, that was here in Torfaen on the 17th of September, the chairs of the 8 funds instructed officers and the relevant external advisors to undertake the work set out on page 47 of the report, namely, to agree key principles that might be embedded into a new exclusions framework, to undertake further analysis with WPP's investment managers to understand potential policy, financial and implementation decisions in line with our fiduciary responsibility, to identify information sources to support potential conduct-based exclusions. This should consider previous failed engagements, and to prepare an exclusions framework for discussion at the next meeting of the WPP in December 2025. We also requested the creation of a joint chairs and officers working group to help kick this work into shape and to ensure that it is delivered on time and to the standard and the specification that we have asked for. In practice, we want this framework to accommodate the WPP's long-standing concerns regarding certain activities and or investments that might aggressively accelerate climate change, alongside categories looking at human rights violations and breaches of international law. Bearing in mind the motions that we've been sent by Monmouthshire and Newport, and the representations we've no doubt now all received from various campaign groups over recent weeks and months, I want to take a couple of minutes to spell out in layman's terms what this framework will and will not provide for. So it will hopefully provide us with a forward-looking vision for the evolution and expansion of our activities in this space, even if it does take some time. And I'm just going to underline that fact. This is something we need to do properly and effectively. If that takes longer than 3 months, and it will take longer than 3 months, I think that's a price worth paying to ensure that we have the most comprehensive and robust system in place to manage this going forward. Having committed to this, we want to create a robust, I'm repeating myself now, and objective mechanism that allows us to balance and accommodate our ethical objectives with legal, financial and fiduciary-related realities and responsibilities. By taking a conduct-based approach, it will hopefully provide clarity when companies, regardless of sector or geographical jurisdiction, are in breach of our agreed guidelines, tightly defined, and therefore activating our exclusions framework. Decisions will need to be fact and evidence-based, they need to be auditable, and they need to be consistently applied. As such, this framework will not allow for country-specific exclusions, and indeed, I do not see this as any move towards any BDS position on behalf of the fund. Neither will it lead the way to a blanket ban on defence industrial capability investments on behalf of the LGPS across Wales. I'm going to pause here to take comments and questions from the rest of the committee, and I'm happy to take views from the advisors as well. So I guess the first question is, do I need to go back and clarify anything along those lines? I think one of the key, I think what we've tried to set out is one of the key requests and campaigning positions that we've received specifically from the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, although we have received communication from others over past months, is for us to take a view on divesting from certain types of companies committed to certain types of activities in the Middle East. Whether we would want to do that or not, the reality is we have no framework at present by which we can take an objective view as to whether to continue investments, to divest or whatever. So we've had to take a step back. The reality of this as well is, and again I think I'll say here quite candidly, some of the chairs have been pushing the WPP to be more public about this work we've been undertaking in private for the last 12 months, but that hasn't been forthcoming. We have been grappling with this, like I said, for much of the last 12 to 15 months. So neither is this something that we have decided to do necessarily due to external pressures being applied to us. So essentially this first bit of my statement, I just want to set out that we need to set up a framework, and these are the principles that we're hoping to put into place. So hopefully that explainer is helpful. Members, any questions? David?
I think what you say makes a lot of sense. There needs to be a carefully thought out framework, and you can't be too, what's the word I'm looking for, you can't go into granular detail. You've actually got to sort of look at clear principles, and I would very much support that. And I would also point out that I think that this is matches up with the approach we've tried to take with developing a responsible investment strategy to look at positive investment, because you also, the other part of that is that you look at the divestment in those things that are not compatible with your responsible investment strategy. So I think that should be borne in mind as well as kind of, if you like, the other side of the coin. I think it makes sense that this is done in a sensible fashion, because I think we can be perhaps occasionally misled by some of the information that others quote. We need to be sure of our own information, where our investments are, and be in a position to argue, I think, positively as to what action we're taking and why, but not be bound by the estimates, I think is the best word that others may put in front of us. I would think it's right to get this right and make sure that we've got the detail of what investments and where. I'm also minded to remember the training that we received, I think, in terms of sort of, which I think was an LGPS training, which was actually looking at the sort of stages that people go through in terms of engagement before you actually look at the divestment. So I guess there's also a bit of, has there been any actual divestment as a consequence of failure to engage from companies with the LGPS as a whole, so that we know, A, has it happened, B, how long has it taken, and C, what sort of things those have been. I hope that's helpful. Some comments?
It is very much. So on that latter point, that definitely, in terms of actually any divestment, that hasn't happened at the WPP level, principally because we've got no mechanism to do it. Well, I don't know, Alex, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, think specifically in respect of Wales.
See, Betty's got a hand up, but I'll take questions or queries from members first before bringing either Betty or Ethan in. Alfie, Stuart in the room, any questions? No? Chris or John? Okay, then Betty.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, having seen some of these letters that have gone to all the LGPS funds or administering authorities, they're so broadly written and very vague. You know, theoretically, you could have to just divest of half the companies that you own because, you know, all the big companies do some sort of work with, you know, certain countries and stuff like that. So there's very, very broad. So I'm glad there's a focus on, you know, fiduciary responsibility and things like that. And I think it's important to differentiate, you know, if there really is a reason to target a specific thing, like, for example, Russia, there are sanctions, which are very, you know, very immediate and which are, you know, decided by Parliament or decided by government and which everybody follows and can be very effective and arguably much more effective than this kind of, you know, kitchen sink approach.
It's as if you're about to tee me up for my second bundle of my second subject area. Does anybody else have anything else, or that you're happy for me to proceed? So thank you very much there. So turning to my second area, as the motions from Newport and Monmouthshire councillors attest, and again, not to mention the upswing in activity and engagement on behalf of pro-Palestinian campaign organisations, public interest in and potential concern surrounding the nature of specific investments held by the Greater Gwent Fund has, I think, understandably grown over the course of current hostilities in the Middle East. As one of the most vocal campaign groups in this space, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign has actively lobbied the LGPS over the past 18 months to divest from all direct and indirect investments in, and I quote, multinational corporations associated with activities that violate international law in Gaza. The PSC has also undertaken and publicised its own research, presenting a best estimate of both the Gwent Fund's individual and the WPP's collective exposure to funds, and again I quote, aiding Israel's breaches of international law, which they have estimated at some 233 million and 1.1 billion respectively. So that's the suggestion is that we have a 233 million pound exposure to companies on certain databases, and that the WPP collectively has 1 billion. I think it's fair to say we dispute these figures, and I would question the methodological approaches employed in their construction, which appear to have included the total value of any investment into any company with a footprint in Israel, regardless of what proportion of that investment might actually be domiciled or directed within Israel. Earlier this year, a private assessment undertaken by Alex Lewis and colleagues suggested that the Gwent Fund held 3.8 million of indirect investments in Israeli domiciled companies, which is worth the equivalent of 0.08% of total assets as per June 2025. Although at the time we chose not to publicise these figures and have not had that conversation directly with the PSC. In pursuit of accuracy and transparency, we want to present an up-to-date and accurate picture of our current financial exposure and ensure that any future discussions are based on factual figures and not on PSC's best estimates. As such, at the WPP meeting on the 17th of September, it was agreed again unanimously that each fund would undertake a fresh and robust analysis of our respective exposures. We hope to publish these figures in December 2025 or in January 2026 at the very latest. Right, again, I'm going to pause here for any further comments or questions from members first. And again, the first question is, was that sufficiently clear? Thank you very much. Stuart, I'll take Stuart.
I'll just make one comment. Following what you said there, you really would be throwing the baby up with the bathwater. I mean, an example of that would be the F-31 fighter Lightning that's supplied to Israel by the Americans. Pretty much every arms manufacturer in the world has got some input into the F-31 fighter. So, you know, BAE, I mean, courier companies, you name it. I mean, again, where you draw that. Sorry? Amazon as well, yes. Yeah. So it's mission impossible, unfortunately.
Thank you, Stuart. David.
Yeah, thank you. I think Stuart sort of has confirmed the point about, you can't be, there's only so far you can go, in terms of the connections, in terms of multinational trade. I think it's entirely right that we get our own work done to accurately assess the exposure, and I would fully support that. And I think it needs to take the time it takes to get it right, bearing in mind the other demands that the teams are facing. McLeod has been one. We've also got the work that's been alluded to before around the new pensions body. So I think it is important, but I think it's also important that there is some thought given to how the messaging is done, how this is actually transmitted in terms of action being taken and expected outcomes. Can I just make those points? And I think your point about the sort of limit of the exposure, 0.08%, is quite helpful. I think the other thing that would be worth considering is that, as you've said, Betty, sometimes international action means that we accepted a bit of a hit on holdings with Russia, for example. So I think it's also looking at what the potential impact is, and that you do have a policy and a strategy to look at reinvestment into alternatives, which goes back to that bit about responsible investment strategy as part of that messaging.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Have you made a note of that? I'm happy to read out the statement. My accomplice here will have to start working out how he put it into practice. Ethan.
Just to echo that point about messaging, I do think it is critical, especially at this juncture around pooling, that we take advantage of our scale to be able to leverage that to message to at the highest level our views on this, and equally that this is a dynamic process. As you mentioned, information is changing all the time, categorization, classification is changing. We need to be abreast of that and able to have a dynamic response. So I think certainly being in line with our pool, with our cohort in the pool, I think is critical, and that we can present a united voice.
I completely agree. I mean, look, this is a subject matter actually that the chairs have actually put their heads together, and I think we were quite vocal at the last meeting that this is definitely something that needed to happen. I think, not betraying too many confidences, that obviously the voice from the city is basically would be more worried about the financial loss that anything that might occur by proceeding with this kind of strategy. Our view is we need that mechanism in place, and then we can take a view exactly what the consequences might be. And the reality is that this also has to be taken, like I said, objectively, which is why I'm stressing this point. This is not a case about taking objections to activities of certain countries and make it that sort of jurisdiction-based exclusions framework. And the fact of the matter is, looking at conduct and behaviours, actually we are setting quite a high bar in terms of what is on and what is off topic, as it were. That might have unintended consequences, because that might mean that there are stocks we hold in companies that nobody is agitating about, or indeed we are currently not on the horizon. We will then need to take a look at and seriously consider whether they remain within the portfolio or otherwise. But I think we are all of a mind, the 8 chairs and the scheme representative, that this is by far the best approach to take, and that actually there is also a reality here, having quite a robust engagement framework and policy in place, but then nothing to hand any of that engagement data over to, is also a deficiency in the current setup. And so, back on Ethan's point, we wanted to ensure that A, this was something we took action on collectively, and that B, it was something we could definitely get into the system in time for the new company to take forward when that company takes over the investment management on behalf of all the funds on April the 1st. Thank you for that. Any other questions? In which case, if members of the committee will indulge me, I think my third area relates in more general terms to the conflict in the Middle East and the impact it's having on both the rhythm and the rectitude of politics here in the UK. I'm sure that no one here needs reminding of the fact, but the Torvine Pensions Committee has no special claim and indeed has no jurisdiction over the crises that have engulfed both Israel and the Palestinian territories in Gaza. So what follow are very much my own personal reflections. I think tomorrow marks the second anniversary of multiple unprovoked and armed attacks on Israeli soil by Hamas terrorists. Something like 1,200 civilians were killed and 250 hostages were taken, 48 of whom remain unaccounted for. Since then, over 65,000 Gazans have been killed as a result of incursions on behalf of the Israeli Defence Force, with thousands upon thousands more have been maimed and injured and bereaved and subjected to a burgeoning humanitarian crisis. As ceasefire talks finally begin today in Egypt, I'm sure that we all hope, quite fervently, that we will soon see an end, or at least see the beginning of an end, to the unimaginable evils of the past 2 years, and proceed, admittedly painstakingly, towards the construction of a new and viable two-state solution that provides peace and security for ordinary Israelis and Palestinians as they attempt to resume some semblance of a normal life. I think this issue has understandably and obviously aroused passions at home, too. I hope that a revived peace process in the Middle East will help reduce the temperature here in the UK. Last week's tragic events in Manchester really do drive home the need for both politicians and activists to pause and reflect on their rhetoric and the actions they employ. The words that we use, the demeanours we adopt, and the manners we project have a much wider meaning and a deeper impact than I think sometimes people realise. So, thank you very much on that. Any further questions or comments? I've got some suggestions on how we move forward before coming to the relevant item on the agenda. Betty.
Your last point is relevant in many contexts, not just Israeli-Palestine.
Correct, but I'm sticking to my lane, and we're only talking about the issue at hand today. Any further questions or queries? John or Chris? No? Everyone happy with that then? So in which case then, the recommendations are on page 48 into page 49. This is sort of paragraph 6.1. So what I'd like members to do is, at bullet number 1, is to note the update in relation to an exclusions framework, not exclusionary, that's my bad drafting, and to comment on the scope of the review. I'm taking it as read that people are happy to note that and are happy for us to proceed on that notice. I'm also, as there's quite a lot of information here, if any members have any comments they'd like to send through to Alex or I over the next 48 hours at least, we'll happily take these on board before we move forward. And number 2 is to discuss the council motions and agree the next steps. I'm aware of the statement as given does not necessarily go toe-to-toe with the items set out in the council motions we've received from both Monmouthshire and Newport, and that is principally because, as again I've said, is the need to take a step back and promote the case for us to create an exclusions framework. What I am proposing to do is that we will reply to both councils, again within the next 48 hours, setting out the fact we have considered the motions and then provide them with a potentially rejigged form of the statement I've read out, setting out the position where we are and what is the art of the possible today in 2025. But then also, as one of the requests that they've both made, is for a review of investments in the Middle East, is to agree that we will, well, basically we'll let them know that we've already agreed to do that across the WPPP and commits to having information to discuss with them by the end of December or the beginning of January. I think it might be worth actually setting out again, Alex, just for our own benefit, is just to stress, though, as much as we are providing information about Israel and Palestine specifically upon their request, that any framework put into place has to have, will not be taking a jurisdiction by jurisdiction view, and indeed we will have to, there will be a phenomenal piece of work for someone to undertake next year to ensure that the exclusions policy, as agreed, is then adhered to across the totality of the exposure across all the 8 funds, if people are happy with that. In which case, I think that item is done. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience. Agenda item number 7. For the first time today, you have Alex's dulcet tones on page 53. It's also, and his ears will go red, it's his birthday. So there we go. Happy birthday, Alex. You now have about sort of 17 items to talk us through the remaining of the meeting.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So focusing on this item is obviously covering an update largely on the annual process that we undergo in terms of drafting and having audited, signed off the annual report and accounts for the pension fund. Members will be familiar that several years ago now the decision was taken for council and pension fund accounts to be separated, and so certainly within Wales the pension fund is responsible for a standalone set of documents that is then subject to its own audit regime. As ever, this is quite a comprehensive update, and that is intentional given the amount of information to digest and the kind of route to final approval. So I'll just take some of these items in kind of three chunks. But just before I get there, every year the accounts are prepared to 31st of March. There's no different this year, and my colleagues, some sat around the table, some online, and some that are busy working on other matters have done a great job again of delivering the draft accounts within the timescales that the council set every year, and alongside the set of accounts is the annual report, which is a comprehensive document that supplements the numbers, if you like. That draft was shared with Audit Wales at the end of August, and Audit Wales are now in the thick of the final year-end audit, and we are in ongoing engagement around their kind of queries, etc. The intention is that that their audit work will conclude by the end of this calendar month. We then have a period throughout November to discuss what is known as the ISA 260. That's effectively the year-end audit report, and a copy of that, together with the accounts, sort of the completed annual report and accounts, will come back to Pension Committee at some stage in November for final approval. And the deadline for publishing those approved set of accounts and annual report is the 1st of December. So every year this timescale is squeezed, largely due to the pressures that Audit Wales face with the extended work that they have and the commitments and obligations that they have. But we are at this stage comfortable that the intention and the expectation is that they will conclude their work in time for us to scrutinise those final documents and ensure appropriate sign-off. The very final step I'll just mention is that, and this is pertinent to the inquiries and management document, the local pension board have a role here, and so ahead of Pension Committee considering these documents as final form with the final audit or ISA 260 report, the local pension board will also have an opportunity to scrutinise the work of officers and comment on the ongoing or the feedback of Audit Wales as they conclude their audit scope. So with those kind of introductory comments in mind, I'll address the three key appendices, if you like, that are covered within this report, starting with the audit plan, and that is from page 57 of your papers. Every year this document is typically prepared following the year-end cycle, and a discussion that officers, primarily I have with the audit manager that leads the work. This document is therefore for information. We typically expect to share this with committee in June, but because of the timing of its publication this year, we were unable to deliver that in time. Hence, we're bringing it now for completeness. But typically, you would see this document at least 3 months earlier than you are doing. Pleasingly, it's pretty standard in what you see year on year. I think page 62 covers the financial audit work, so sets out really what the role of the auditor is, and then it focuses on what we call materiality. So that is effectively a sensible threshold that is established, and the role of the auditor is not to give absolute assurance. They don't scrutinise every single transaction and sit and give the pension committee complete comfort that there are no financial misstatements or that every single possibility of fraudulent transactions or activity is not present. But what they do is give a convincing level of assurance over that, and they use materiality as a way in which to set that sensible threshold, as I mentioned. So page 63 gives an indication of those figures. Given the size of the pension fund, around 4.5 billion of assets at the financial year end, materiality at 1% of that 4.5 billion still represents quite a big number, just over £42.5 million. There is a performance materiality, so that's a sort of slightly reduced 75% of just under £32 million. Clearly, those are very big numbers, and it could be argued that wouldn't capture some of the transactional activity that is much smaller but still material when it comes to fraud, particularly with fraud, but also with other misstatements. So there is a reporting threshold which is more trivial, but still at a £2.13 million figure. The report does note related party disclosures. Typically, that focuses on officers with significant sort of involvement and oversight of the pension fund, namely Andrew and I, around both of us being members of the scheme. So there is a consideration for any related party disclosure. Page 64, 65 really is just for information. It covers some of the risks that you would expect to see, and I'll touch on risk a little bit further in the document, but pleasingly to say, very standard as we would expect. Page 66 covers the audit timetable, which I alluded to in my introductory remarks. We are deep into that kind of field work stage, which is between September and November now, and we hope that the bulk of the audit will be concluded by the end of October, allowing that sort of 30-day period to finalise proceedings and ensure we meet that statutory publication deadline. 68 covers the audit fee. There's a circa £54,000 annual fee that the pension fund pays for the services of Audit Wales. That is obviously set by Audit Wales, and there has been a moderate 1.7% uplift in the fee from the prior year, which really reflects the inflationary pressures. I should say that Audit Wales also undertake a consultation exercise annually on fees and service delivery more broadly, and we have responded in the last couple of weeks with feedback on that, noting that fees have increased year on year. And whilst we're satisfied with the service delivery, I think the timing and the pressures that Audit Wales face does present challenges for us as effectively as their client. Audit team covered on page 69. There's a slight change to the audit manager and the audit lead from prior years. Engagement lead Richard Harries remains a constant figure there, which is, I think, reassuring. We've had lots of engagement with Mike and Zibby, and I think maybe some of the committee have met them at a prior meeting as well. So no concerns there. That document is there for information. As I said, typically we would have expected to have shared that with you in June, but the timing this year meant that wasn't possible. But hopefully that gives context. And maybe have a pause there in case there are any comments or questions before I dive into the second of the three areas.
Thank you, Alex. David.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? I'm sorry. I was going to ask a question about the audit fee, and you've obviously clarified its uplift. I just wondered whether there had been any material difference given the fact that the pension fund was being audited separately from the council, and whether the council gained any benefit in terms of the overall fees being paid to audit as a result of that. That was the first bit.
Alex?
Sorry.
No change. The comment I made about the separation of the council and the pension fund accounts is something that happened several years ago. So this is consistent. We've seen Audit Wales have a fee for the council's audit and the pension fund as separate items, and there's been no impact, certainly in the very recent times, of that arrangement on the fee. It reflects staffing pressure, costs, I think, which is fairly consistent across the public sector. And to an extent, the complexity of the work that they're carrying out, particularly in respect of the council, I think, but also with the pension fund.
Yeah, sorry, the second bit was really sort of, obviously, we've seen the report of the internal audit, which was fairly satisfactory, so that gives you sort of a basis for some of your comment. I guess it was just noting that there was quite shorter responses to the questions than there'd been in the previous year, and I just wondered if this was perhaps a reflection of anything, perhaps more confidence in things. It was just, it was notable that there was a lot less, and I was just curious as to why that might be. Sorry.
Sure. Thanks, Councillor Williams. I can address that because I was just going to come on to the inquiries of management document, given that we're asking the committee to effectively approve those responses. But maybe in terms of introducing this particular document, and I'm referring to page 74 of the papers, inquiries and management is a request on Audit Wales' part annually. Historically, this has been a document largely populated by the council's sort of senior finance officers, and I've had input into that, and my predecessor has done in the sort of last half dozen years. So this year, Audit Wales have revised their requirements essentially and asked that the pension fund provides a standalone response. To assist the members of the pension committee, what we thought we would do is show the 23-24 response alongside our draft response subject to pension committee approval. It is, I guess, scaled back some of the detail that doesn't exist. I think what is inherent in this approach is that a number of the governance processes and the internal controls that apply to the council continue to apply to the pension fund. So I think the pension fund is still subject to, particularly for its officers, the payroll arrangements that exist for the council and all the internal control framework that exists there. That's just one example. So what we have tried to do here is not duplicate what the council would prepare in its response that is subject to the governance and audit committee's sign-off. Instead what we've done is specifically referenced the pertinent points as they relate to the pension fund. So hopefully that clarifies in terms of, and we can talk to some of the examples if it's helpful.
Yeah, I thought that was probably the likely response, because obviously there's a slightly different ambit for yourselves now as pension fund only, but it's helpful to have that clarification, because it's also helpful, if you like, with sitting on the governance and audit committee to be aware of that, because it'll come up in that sense for them as well.
Thank you, David, for that. Anybody else? Members? No? Carol, back to you, Alex.
Okay, I think in that vein, it might be useful just to draw a couple of examples out of this document. I mean, it's there largely for information. We are asking for members to be satisfied in approving this as a response that we take forward to Audit Wales, but I can give a couple of examples and of course, address any specific questions if they're not covered here. So maybe we turn to page 76. And question 7, which is probably one of the more detailed responses we've given, actually. The question that Audit Wales have asked us is around reliance on estimates. As you can imagine, and there's an item that discusses valuation progress later today, the nature of pension fund being very long-term and forward-looking generally is that you have to make a number of estimates in terms of what you disclose, the most material being the projected value of future pension liabilities. That is not something that we can prepare internally necessarily, and we rely on Hymans Robertson as our actuarial advisor, and Barry's on the call to assist with the later part of this agenda. But one area that they undertake is a review of the pension liability annually, and we satisfy ourselves of that process and effectively what we disclose. So that is quite different to something that the council may typically have estimate uncertainty around, and so this document, we've detailed our process around that, where there is a specific difference to the council. Where we rely on a council internal control, for example, we've been quite light touch in our response. So hopefully that is giving a flavour of the reason why some of our responses are more detailed and others are perhaps less so. Page 81, there's a second example, which is always quite a slightly strange one for a pension fund, but it talks about going concern. Essentially, going concern is the concept that auditors seek assurance from management that the organisation will operate beyond the next 12 months, and in doing so, you're preparing your accounts on that basis. So, the nature of the pension fund, obviously, we are committed and we have obligations for several decades into the future, and so when we think about going concern, there's a couple of factors, I guess. One is if the fund was to crystallise today, and I think that would be quite a draconian outcome, then you would assess the value of assets available to pay those liabilities, and as we'll hear later in the agenda, we expect that the fund would now have excess assets versus liabilities, so we could make good on all of those obligations today. So I think there's one pretty profound consideration in terms of going concern. We also think about liquidity and the ability to pay those pensions. So we've talked a lot about the fact that the pension fund and the committee have a strategic allocation to cash. So we maintain enough liquid cash to make our obligations each month, namely the pension payroll. But also within that strategic allocation, there's sort of 60% plus of our portfolio that we could access liquidity within a matter of days, if not weeks. So we're able to meet all of our obligations beyond the next 12 months. And as I say, on a longer term picture, we would expect, as of today, the fund to have more assets than it needs to pay those pension benefits. So again, some specific considerations on going concern for the pension fund versus what the council may see. The final one I just wanted to highlight is on page 100, jumping quite a long way through. And in relation to question 3 here is about exercising oversight of management process. So as you know, there are kind of two bodies that undertake that. Ultimately, Pension Committee are the delegated body responsible for all matters that affect the pension fund, but we also have the local pension board that has a specific oversight function. Effectively does have a scrutiny role, although not formally. And so, as I mentioned in my introductory comments, the pension board will review our risk management approach and make recommendations to management as well as committee, but they will also consider the outcome of the annual accounts process and the draft audit opinion and make recommendations back to management ahead of that coming to pension committee. So there's an additional governance layer which effectively replicates the governance and audit committee of the council, but it is a distinct body that has a separate role and responsibility. So those are just a couple of examples, I think, where there's a difference between the pension fund's governance arrangements and the council, but largely this document reflects kind of prior year responses, just in a way where we've separated more clearly at the request of Audit Wales, where the pension fund has a specific role relative to what we rely on from the council. So, again, I can pause there before we touch on the annual report and accounts, but hopefully members are comfortable with that process ahead of a recommendation to approve.
Thank you, Alex. Members, David.
Just to say, I think that was a very helpful and comprehensive response, so, you know, put any fears to bed.
Does everybody agree with David that we can put our fears to bed after Alex's comprehensive twirl for that one? Again, third bite of the cherry, back to Alex.
Sure. And I appreciate this is the largest of those appendices, and so this very much is for information today.
Yeah, we're not going to go through these line by line. No.
We're not intentionally to do line by line, but I'm happy to take any comments on the document. As I say, this is something that we've developed alongside preparing the accounts. It was submitted to Audit Wales on the 31st of August. Whilst fundamentally Audit Wales are reviewing the accounts, they also do review the annual report for consistency of messaging and that the disclosures are consistent with what we've stated in our accounts and the representations of management. So there is some work to do in this space. It is a draft document. As I say, it is subject to comments. Hopefully the structure and the order is fairly familiar to members for those who've been on this committee for a number of years. It is consistent with the SIPFA guidance that is issued. There haven't been any material changes to that guidance this year, recognising there's lots going on in the sector in general, and I would expect that probably to change in the coming years. So we're consistent and compliant with the guidance. There's some detailed information around pooling on page 137, and I should say I'm definitely underselling the work of my colleagues in terms of preparing this document here, but pooling is covered under page 137, covers a lot of the work of the Wealth Pension Partnership and obviously starts to allude to direction of travel in relation to the development of the new investment management company. Investment performance, which is obviously a big part of what we manage, the circa 4.5 billion of assets, that's page 147. We also detail the investment allocation, which the committee have approved. Page 156 covers all of the detailed work of the administration report. You obviously have detailed quarterly updates and have had already today on this agenda. So this captures the 12-month picture. And as we talked about, the accounts are embedded from page 181. And that is the area that Audit Wales are currently working through. So the intention is to return in November with a final set of documents, fully audited, seeking approval to proceed to publishing those documents. We have a window of around 4 to 6 weeks to make any changes. And so if there are any comments on that document, then please feel free to share them with us, and we'll incorporate that ahead of that kind of cut-off point, which is going to be around sort of the first or second week in November.
Thank you. Alex, members. David.
No, just to commend the report. I think it's very detailed, and I think it's helpful to see the elements about responsible investment at number 4 and impact investment at 5. And looking ahead, it may be that we might need to consider the framework that's been alluded to in the previous item in a subsequent report. Simple observations, that's it.
Thank you very much for that. Anybody else? In which case, I mean, I'd like to sort of echo on behalf of the committee, as ever, the phenomenal amount of work that goes into creating these documents. So, well done, congratulations. I have a question though, as I've noticed that currently the forward and the introduction are both blank. And he makes me write my own forward. I think it's shocking. When do you need that back?
As soon as possible.
Great. Okay. Well, I love you too. What is the final date?
Audit Wales actually reviewed the forward to get a sense of is the document actually the introduction of this document consistent with what they understand to be the activity of the year. So we need it within the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Fine, I believe is what I was about to say. Okay, fantastic. Okay, in which case then, can I draw, again, thank you very much for that. Can I draw members' attention then to the recommendations? That's paragraph 7.1, way back on page 55. So, the recommendations are that the Pension Committee, 1, note the draft audit plan produced by Audit Wales. Everyone happy to note that. 2, to approve the responses provided to Audit Wales' inquiries of management. Again, I think full marks on those. And 3, to note the draft annual report and accounts for 2024 to 2025 and raise any questions on the contents as appropriate. Excellent. And if anybody wants to help me crowdsource the forward, please contact me ASAP. Thank you very much. Right. Item number 8. This is the quarterly investment performance report. If you can remember it, for quarter 2 of 2025, starts on page 221. So this report is being presented by David, I believe, and Lewis, which is why Lewis is wearing a tie. So who's going first?
I'll take this one.
There we go. I have to love the confidence. Lewis, please talk us through the report.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So today I'll take you through the quarter 2 or Q2 investment performance report for the fund, covering the period from the 1st of April to the 30th of June 2025. In terms of how I intend to present the report, first off I'll cover the executive summary, which is essentially an overview of the report's key sections, drawing out the most important takeaways. I'll then delve into some of the report sections in a bit more detail, followed by some concluding remarks. Upon conclusion of the report, I'll open up the room to any questions before asking Ethan, the fund's independent advisor, to present the usual macroeconomic report, which, due to the time lag in which this report is being presented, will briefly summarise the events of Q2, but will lean more heavily into the narrative of Q3. This will provide an indication of what to expect in terms of fund performance ahead of the next committee meeting in December 2025. So I'll firstly take you through the executive summary. So touching on overall fund performance, in Q2, the fund delivered a positive return of 4.19%, which was just 0.01% or 1 basis point shy of the benchmark return of 4.2%. This means that in monetary terms, the fund's value grew by £179 million, taking total assets under management to £4.617 billion at the end of June 2025. Over the past 12 months, the fund returned 7.31%, again slightly behind the benchmark of 7.55%. And while last year's performance lagged marginally, the longer-term returns remain ahead of the benchmark, which is pleasing to see. Moving on now to asset class drivers. So the strong Q2 result was largely driven by equities, but was supported by positive performance from fixed income, multi-asset and property holdings. For private market investments, such as infrastructure and private credit, it's still relatively early to draw meaningful conclusions about performance, although the table within section 8.1 of this report provides an early indication. Whilst performance data is limited, most projects continue to perform in line with expectations. Now looking at asset allocation, as at the end of June, the fund remained overweight to equities and listed fixed income, and underweight to real estate, infrastructure, private credit and multi-asset relative to our strategic targets. This gap has narrowed over time, particularly since the previous investment strategy review in 2023, and rebalancing will continue as capital is gradually deployed into private markets and into the new WPP real estate platform, which is expected to officially launch in November 2025. Currently, about 76% of assets are pooled with the WPP, and this figure is expected to rise significantly over the next 6 months, with the goal of reaching full pooling by March 2026. In terms of private market commitments, the fund has now committed £1.078 billion, or around 24% of total assets, to private market investments, covering infrastructure and private credit. Of that amount, approximately £517 million, or 48% of fund AUM, has been deployed so far. During Q2, we reallocated £20 million from equities into various private market investments. For Q3 to date, looking at more recent developments, as of the 31st of August 2025, the fund's value increased further to £4.812 billion, which represents an additional gain of around £195 million since the end of June. A more comprehensive update on Q3 will be provided at the next December meeting. And lastly, within the executive summary, from a long-term perspective, the fund continues to deliver strong performance, with a 3-year annualised return of 9.67%, a 5-year annualised return of 8.33%, a 10-year annualised return of 7.85%, and an inception-to-date performance of 6.41%. Each of these long-term figures remain ahead of benchmark and well above the actuarial discount rate of 4.3%, which is encouraging for the fund's funding position. Now, moving on to a more detailed review of each section within the report, starting with the public market overview. So firstly, looking at equities. US equities were driven by renewed strength in the technology and communication sectors. The so-called Magnificent Seven stocks and AI-related names bounced back after a challenging first quarter. European shares also performed well, especially in industrials and real estate, which was supported by European Central Bank rate cuts. In the UK, the FTSE All-Share rose, with mid-caps in the FTSE 250 outpacing the FTSE 100, boosted by rate cuts from the Bank of England. Emerging markets also saw strong gains, helped by a weaker US dollar and progress in the US-China trade discussions. Asia ex-Japan markets, particularly Korea, Taiwan and Hong Kong, benefited from improvement sentiment towards tech and AI stocks. Now, quickly moving on to bonds and credit. Credit markets remained resilient despite global uncertainties, with strong performance in both investment-grade and high-yield bonds, and US investment-grade spreads widened initially after the Liberation Day tariffs, but then tightened again, helping credit outperform government bonds. Overall, returns were positive across sectors and geographies. Next up, I'll talk you through the fund's asset class performance and attribution in more detail. So starting off with equities, the fund's aggregated equity holdings gained 5.66% in the quarter. Pleasingly, all mandates delivered positive returns, ranging from 7.74% for the WPP Emerging Market Subfund to 3.58% for the WPP Active Sustainable Equity Fund. In terms of active management, the WPP UK Equities Fund delivered the strongest active outperformance, beating its benchmark by 3.21%, whereas the Invesco Asia Fund underperformed by 2.26%. Pleasingly, over the last 12 months, equities have returned 8.5%. Now moving on to fixed income performance. The fund's aggregated fixed income exposure generated 1.68%, with global government bonds posting a return of 1.53%, outperforming its respective benchmark by 1.39%, and the global credit fund delivered a 1.83% absolute return, slightly behind the benchmark return by 0.12%. And for the past 12 months, fixed income returned on aggregate 3.83%. For multi-asset, the Fidelity Multi-Asset Income Fund is the fund's remaining multi-asset investment, and in Q2 it delivered a return of plus 1.22%, which was marginally ahead of cash. And over the past year, this fund has delivered plus 5.47%. It's important to note that strategies of this nature play an important role in diversification and in adapting to shifting market conditions. Now on to real estate. UK property holdings posted a return of 1.23% during the quarter and 4.66% over the year. This was slightly behind benchmark, but reflects ongoing recovery after a challenging period for the asset class over the last couple of years. The fund is currently 6.4% underweight to real estate relative to its target weight of 8%, so upcoming deployment into the new WPP real estate platform will help close this gap. Lastly, cash holdings generated a small positive return of 0.65% in Q2. So cash levels are typically kept below 1% of total assets to avoid performance drag, but were temporarily higher to meet private market drawdowns in early July. Now moving on to performance attribution. So here I'm referring to section 5.6 of the report. This is a new addition to the report which highlights how each of the fund's asset classes contributed to overall returns. I thought it was important to demonstrate just how impactful the fund's equity exposure has been, not just in Q2, but over the last 5 years more generally, and to demonstrate how much of a tailwind, meaning beneficial factor, the overweight exposure to the asset class has been, despite deviating from the strategic target rate of 57%. As you can see from the table, equities drove over 94% of the total gain in Q2, contributing 3.94%, with smaller contributions from fixed income, multi-asset and real estate, while private markets were slightly negative due to early-stage valuations and FX movements. Speaking of FX movements, approximately 60% of the fund's assets are held in sterling currencies. Sterling, during Q2, strengthened by 6% against the US dollar, reversing a tailwind that had previously boosted returns. This currency shift had a modest drag on performance, particularly in USD-denominated holdings, though over the long term we expect these effects to balance out. However, rising sterling and a weakening of the US dollar and growing allocations to alternatives and other asset classes have prompted officers to consider with advisors the relative cost and benefit of more opportunistic and active ways of managing foreign exchange mismatch between the fund's multi-currency portfolio and sterling-denominated liabilities. In practice, this is something that would likely be deployed via the new WPP Investment Management Company. Now looking at asset allocation in more detail. A breakdown of the fund's entire portfolio is illustrated by the table in section 6.2 of the report. As you can see, at the end of Q2, equity still accounted for around 71.7% of the fund's assets, which is above our long-term target of 57%. Similar takeaways can be said of the fund's listed fixed income exposure, comprised of global credit and global government bonds. We plan to continue reducing these holdings, in the first instance by trimming our existing passive equity exposure and redirecting capital into real assets and private credit in accordance with our strategic asset allocation. The fund's exposure to real estate will also increase significantly in the coming months. As previously mentioned, capital is deployed into the WPP real estate platform, investment of which was approved by the Pension Committee in December 2024. The fund has committed approximately $145 million to the CBRE Global Real Estate Fund, which is categorised in the December meeting as Lot 2, and $180 million to the Schroders Lot 3 programme, comprised of a specialised property portfolio with a bias for assets held in Wales. Now, touching on private markets, which is section 8 of the report. The fund's private market investments now span across 17 mandates, featuring infrastructure, private credit and forestry investments. This is depicted by the table in section 8.1. 517 million, or around 48% of committed capital, has been deployed of the 1.078 billion total commitment thus far. Some mandates have so far delivered positive multiple on invested capital figures, while others are still ramping up. As a reminder, multiple on invested capital is a metric that measures the value generated by an investment relative to the initial investment. This is indicative and based on March capital values and cash flow in Q2 2025. Additionally, there were 3 significant new commitments made during Q2. There was a 200 million commitment to GCM Global Infrastructure. This is split out by 125 million investment into a global strategy and a 75 million commitment to a dedicated UK sleeve. 75 million was also committed to the second Russell Global Private Credit Vintage, and a 25 million pound commitment was made to the Gresham House Forestry Fund 6. Each of the above investments were formally approved by the Pension Committee over the last 12 months. These commitments reflect our continued transition towards strategic targets for various private market assets. Moving on now to the Q3 quarter-to-date section. So, as previously mentioned within the executive summary, as of the end of August 2025, the fund's value had risen further to 4.812 billion, an increase of approximately 195 million, or around 4.2% since the end of June. As mentioned previously, a narrative of the macroeconomic backdrop surrounding Q3 will will soon be provided by the fund's independent advisor, Ethan. To conclude, or to summarise, the fund achieved a 4.19% return in Q2 with strong gains in equities. The fund's value increased by 179 million during the quarter and by an additional 195 million in the first 2 months of Q3. Crucially, long-term returns remain ahead of benchmark and, importantly, comfortably above the actuarial discount rate agreed during the previous valuation process in 2022. And lastly, just a reminder that we're continuing to rebalance the portfolio towards strategic allocation targets, with further investments into private markets and real estate expected in due course. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions before passing on to Ethan to present her macroeconomic report.
Well, thank you very much, Lewis. That was a very impressive performance, but also some very impressive, I think, figures and information in the report. Again, I think two sort of high-level observations from me. It is quite good seeing a plan come together when we're looking at the way the decisions we've taken over the last couple of years about the asset allocations, and actually some of those decisions being proved to be correct, or at least at the moment they've been proved to be correct. And it's also very encouraging to see that the upward trajectory of the total assets under management. It's a shame we couldn't get to 5 billion at the time of the triennial exercise earlier on in the year. But like I said, we're well on course to being the best funded and largest pension fund in Wales, which is obviously where I want to be by the end of the term. No pressure to anybody there. So, they were very high-level observations, but again, I think well done to everyone on the team for the hard work over the last quarter. Any questions or queries from members? Anybody on the screen first? No, in which case, David.
Yeah, thank you. It's helpful, but also perhaps slightly concerning to see that it's the equities that are sort of generating the bulk of the investment return. And obviously, we're still targeting to reduce that down from 71% to about 57%. So I guess from what you've said about the slower rate of return on things like the real assets, we could see a sort of fall if we start to go further. But obviously, that also should be put in light of the previous discussions around having a strategy around how we look at what we invest in, and I think that's probably the way to go. Good to see that we seem to be pretty much on getting closer and closer to the target around fixed income and private credit. Only just a couple of % behind, and I think that's a definite increase since I first came onto the committee. So that's really good to see. And I think, the progress in terms of the real assets, which I think were well below 10%, now above it. So, again, it's macro stuff, but, it feels like we're going in the right direction without having a negative impact on the overall fiduciary duty that we have and the returns that we're getting. Thank you.
I second that. Betty.
Yeah, I will make my broken record point. As we point out, we're getting more and more into real assets and not listed assets. You mentioned, for example, allocating more to global real estate. The bulk of our private credit now is dollar denominated, or not sterling. Quite a lot of the infrastructure and a growing part is non-sterling. And in a quarter where sterling appreciated by 6% against a dollar, a lot of that is the relative performance is that the underlying assets in the local currency can perform fine, but then when they're translated back into sterling, they lose 6%, whereas if the benchmark is like 8% or 10%, that does not have a translation effect. So these benchmark comparisons are almost becoming, I don't want to say meaningless, but less meaningful for they're distorted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If everyone's happy, though, I'll move on to Ethan.
Yeah, great. Well, that was a very comprehensive summary, and just to put some context around it. So I did go back into looking at the June end macro situation to see how much it had changed since this report, which was written as of the end of September. And the interesting point is that some of the trends in place that we can discuss here were already, the foundation was being laid down at the end of June. So what we saw there was a remarkably strong equity market, despite the fact that there was a cloud of uncertainty in the post-Liberation Day Trump tariff era. as well as an abundance of noise, and it was difficult to navigate that noise. This was actually going back into my podcast from the end of June. I think Rachel Reeves' tears had been in the headlines just that week, and we know that that precipitated some crisis of confidence in the UK, which really hasn't gone away. It just expressed itself at different times in the demand for UK gilts, which have not been very strong, and at times there has been a voting with investors' feet in terms of their confidence in the UK. So the UK, I saw a recent quip that the only net zero the UK was pursuing in earnest was a net zero growth approach. That did seem to be very low growth, as well as high inflation and high government debt. So those that trifecta is not a particularly buoyant economic backdrop. I'd say that some aspects of that trifecta are in effect around the world, the exception being growth. There has been a stronger growth picture in the US, at least. Europe is kind of eking along at very modest growth levels. So all of this sits at odds with the record-breaking equity markets. And I'd say that it has been obviously to our benefit that we have not got to our strategy allocation in equities, because the equity has been lifting us for the most part. Why is equity so strong if everything else is so questionable? I'd say in the US there has been definitely a savior has been the AI wave. And given that AI wave dominates, the tech companies now represent 40% of the S&P, and AI is a strong component of that, the enthusiasm around that, the spending around that, the cash richness of these companies has really been the saving grace of equity markets. And I'd suggest that even though the global markets, with the exception of China perhaps, are not really participating to that degree, the rising tide of equity market buoyancy has been lifting all ships. So we're seeing this participation by global markets, which again has benefited us. And what do we do with the kind of negativity? And do we worry about that in terms of whether that will impact our portfolio? I'd say yes and no, and we do need to worry whether there could be a puncture of that AI bubble and whether that would lead to kind of equity market slack. I'd say the offset to that is there is a lot of money on the sidelines in markets, not just in the US. Money sitting in money market funds earning decent amounts of a return. That money could be poised to enter markets should they weaken. So that's a strong technical underpinning. I'd say that there's inklings of some of the weakness. It's ironic, it's actually been to our benefit that our private market portfolio has not been drawn down. But the reason it has not been drawn down is to do with some of the crowding in that market, the inability to put money to work with business models that just don't work with the interest rates being where they are. And I'd say also a sense of frothiness perhaps in areas like private credit because of all the crowding and just an inability to get the returns. And these returns will probably start coming down due to the floating rate as interest rates come down. So we do need to look at that allocation and expect perhaps a slower investment period than we would have expected, mainly because we've had a slower return of capital than we might have expected in private markets on the whole. Hasn't really affected us. We haven't really been exposed there. But as return of capital is slower due to just a more sluggish private market, that's probably going to lead to a slower application too. So we may be overweight in equities for longer than we think, but that may not necessarily be such a bad thing. The other thing I'd mentioned in this report, which is relevant because we have, with our focus on sustainability, we have been strong believers in the sustainable growth story and the need for renewable energy to be in our portfolio, as well as some of the green technology. That has faced consistent headwinds since the Trump administration has come in the US, and we've seen it particularly with wind. So I would just say that's an area that is going to be prone to some, I'd say, wider swings than in the past because of just this regulatory uncertainty, as well as some of the momentum and sentiment headwinds. And where do we sit now as we look to the end of the year? Well, clearly we're looking at probably more falling rates in the US, which should stimulate some corporate activity. Probably no reason to expect a bubble to burst in the fact that we have strong underpinnings around the tech bubble, so it's probably likely to be stronger. The euro is at a 15-year high. The dollar is quite low in relative terms. Do we see that falling further? At this point, this maybe is relevant to our currency market discussion. Maybe not necessarily, but equally, clearly with the very low growth in the UK, the UK market itself looking reasonably, I'd say, precarious as we go into the end of the year. So not much has changed, in effect, since this report was written in terms of the trends. I'd say all those trends have become accentuated. The noise just has been, volume of noise has been increasing all around the world. But we do see some indications on the geopolitical front of at least in some areas in the Middle East, perhaps a peace deal. That's unlikely to boost markets, but then again, it's unlikely to act as a risk factor either. So I'd say that's a relatively sanguine and positive outlook as we look to the end of the year.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Ethan. Pretty comprehensive. Does anybody have any questions? Ethan, Betty.
Just wanted to observe that, and you mentioned the discount rate, Lewis, but the discount rate is actually rising to 6%. It's no longer 4.3 or 4.2. And so we're going to have higher returns on all of our investments, including private markets. And so points Ethan made, which I concur with, about possibly being bubble conditions in some markets, we're going to need to earn higher returns than maybe was the case over the past few years. I think it's also a good reason to just be a bit more cautious going forward.
That's a very good point to raise. Okay, thank you very much for raising it. Anybody else? No? In which case, can I draw members' attention to recommendation or paragraph 11.1 on page 232, which I have myself now lost. Hang on. Right, so it's recommended that members note the investment performance that has taken place during quarter 2 of 2025. Everyone happy to note that? Excellent then. Well, hang on, I didn't check. Everyone on the screen happy? Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Item number 9. Back to Alex. This is on page 263, and this is the Wales Pension Partnership update.
Thank you very much. This is generally a standard quarterly update on the activity of the Wales Pool, but there is an update on the ongoing project in Project Snowdon, which relates to the government's Fit for Future consultation. So I'll start with the kind of the routine business, and we can touch on that detail in a second. As ever, we try to capture in these updates the ongoing discussions within the Wales Pension Partnership via the Joint Governance Committee. The chair of the Greater Gwent Pension Committee is a member of that body, and as alluded to earlier in the agenda, the last meeting of that body was on the 17th of September here in the Civic Centre. We have enclosed or attached as an appendix from page 267 a very summarised version of the kind of meeting, the notes of that meeting, I suppose, and the decisions that were taken. Much of that is for information, but there are a couple of pertinent points which I will address as part of this update in a second. On page 264, as ever, and this is in the appendix, there is a operator update. So Waystone UK Limited are the operator that manages and oversees the, amongst others, the authorised contractual scheme, which is the ACS, that is a vehicle that houses effectively all of the WPP sub-funds, save for the private market allocations and the global passive equity solution, which is still at this stage a BlackRock product. Page 264, there's a snapshot of the funds. So this is the Greater Gwent Fund's exposure to the various sub-funds as of 30th of June. So there is a bit of a reporting lag, but as Lewis referenced in the prior item, we're generally comfortable with direction. I think the headline is just over 3/4 of the assets are actively managed in pooled fund structures now, and with that allocation to private markets and the actual drawdown of those allocations, we're seeing that number tick up every quarter as a minimum. We expect, for example, that the imminent real estate onboarding to encourage further participation in WPP in that regard. I think that there is a document within this pack. I didn't propose to go through it given the amount that is on our agenda today, but any questions or comments on the kind of routine engagement and business that's undertaken with the operator is there for information, and happy to take any comments. I think that probably just takes me to a bit of an update on Project Snowdon, so page 265. Just a reminder for all members of the committee, going back just about 12 months, the government launched its Fit for Future consultation. A significant reform proposal for the way in which the LGPS manage the circa 400 billion of assets that the 86-87 pension funds administer. Within those consultation proposals, there were sort of half dozen requirements, some pretty material ones as they relate to Wales. The most significant being that the ask of Wales was to create a standalone regulated investment management company, but over and above, and all of these other reforms apply to the other existing pools, of which there are now 5 others. The capability to provide investment advice at the company level, which that advice will find its way back to the underlying funds, to provide full portfolio implementation. So that is a step that's already been carried out since 2016 or 2017, but essentially the implementation and management of all of those assets on behalf of the funds as effectively as clients, certainly as partners. We've talked about the sort of 76% of the Greater Gwent Fund assets that sit within pool structures today. So there's 25% still out with the pool. Obviously, some of that is tied up in allocations to private markets, but essentially all of those, 100% of those assets are to be under the purview of the pool company. And there are some governance requirements as well, which shouldn't be overlooked, but effectively are areas that this fund has progressed for a number of years in anticipation of further legislation. What that means is the government have asked that these reform measures are implemented by April 26. That was confirmed in their consultation response, which followed earlier this year. And members will recall that alongside response to the consultation, Wales, alongside all of the other pools, had to prepare a business case to government setting out its rationale for why it should either stand alone and continue to operate in the way it did with the reforms integrated into its approach, or merge with an alternative. We reported previously that following the submission of those 8 requests, effectively from what was then 8 LGPS pools, 6 were given the green light to proceed to undertake those reforms ahead of April next year. 2, being Brunel Pension Partnership based in Bristol and Access, were asked to consider merger opportunities with other existing pool companies, and just in the last few weeks, the sort of 21 administering authorities that were sort of part of those 2 pools that had been told to find alternative homes have now managed to find those alternative homes. The government had asked for that to be the indication from those funds by the end of September. So there's been a lot of activity across the LGPS in general. Pleasingly for Wales, the rationale for standing alone was supported and approved by government, so we have been able to proceed with our own significant project, aptly named Project Snowdon. So that's a kind of run-through of the last 12 months. On page 265, we've summarised where we've got to date. So pleased to say that WPP Investment Management Company was incorporated in August, and so the company now exists, it's registered on Companies House. It has a board of directors, which comprises of 4 of the 8 council Section 151 officers at this stage. That is a very much a transitory arrangement, referred to perhaps more generally now as a mobilisation period. It's recognised that as the company builds out its capability, the board of directors will turn over, and we will have some external parties that will join with industry experience that can support the entity and the management effectively, with the 151 officers reverting to their substantive roles as representatives of the shareholders effectively. So, company incorporated, board of directors, and in September the company appointed its CEO, and the meeting that was held here a couple of weeks ago, the WPP announced that appointment as Rob Lamb. So Rob has joined as CEO and has now been in post for about a month, and has been very active, focusing on kind of the real key responsibilities, which are the pursuit of the FCA approval process. That's certainly not something to overlook or underestimate. It's a significant activity with a sort of 4 to 6 month time frame in terms of achieving that authorisation. And the FCA are looking for, obviously, a comprehensive understanding of your business case, and the capability as an organisation to deliver the services required to its partner funds or its clients, but also for the individuals. They're very keen on the credibility, the capability, and the propriety of the individuals that are representing that company. So Rob has come in as an SMF, a senior management function as considered by the FCA, and there will be a number of senior hires that need to follow in order for that FCA application to proceed. I think that really turns to kind of resourcing of the company and where we've got to date. As I say, Rob has been working now with the Board of Directors on proposals prioritising resourcing as a first port of call, and we expect that the company will start to advertise for some of the roles required to run this organisation as soon as this month. That will obviously be a thorough process led by the Chief Executive, but supported by various advisors as necessary. On a more interim basis, and I think referring to that mobilisation period, we obviously have a Board of Directors that is made up of the 151 officers. There's also been an arrangement to effectively look to secondees from the existing LGPS structure within Wales, and 4 roles were identified by the CEO, being finance, investment, operations, and partner funds engagement, so how the company interacts with the councils effectively as its shareholders. And following an expression of interest proposal, 4 appointments to those seconded arrangements were made. From within Torfaen, myself and David McFadgen have assumed 2 of those secondee roles, covering investment and operations, and those arrangements formally start today, but in reality have been running in the background. And I think just to reassure the committee around where focus lies, that as I think I've reported previously, I was nominated to become the workstream lead for the IMCO build. So I see the kind of secondee as effectively a continuation of that arrangement, but it's been recognised that a proportion of my time should be dedicated to the company in this sort of next 6-month period, really. The timescale is to get us to operational by April next year, but given that there is a full recruitment exercise running in parallel, it may be that some of these roles don't run that full duration, and so I would then revert to substantive roles. So we've discussed internally, and we have provision in terms of managing resource during this period, but I think what hopefully should reassure the committee is that with Andrew's representation on the transitionary Board of Directors, there is a Torfaen presence, if you like, which is helping to shape the direction of travel, which, you know, I think it recognised how important the next sort of 6-12 months are in particular in terms of getting this organisation up and running. So that's covered the resourcing aspect. The focus of those secondees is really to help the CEO understand the culture and the context in which they're operating within. It's obviously a new startup organisation, but with a significant history and a positive collaborative working arrangement that has existed formally since 2016-17, but in reality earlier than that. So I think there's good muscle memory around the table, a good understanding of the objectives, supplemented with some senior external expertise that will help represent the company through the FCA particularly, but also attracting the right calibre of individual to come on board and help to run this organisation for the benefit of its partner funds. Just in terms of, I suppose, the kind of next 6 months, I've talked a lot about the FCA. That's a key step in this process that must be delivered in order for this to carry out. But over and above that, the company has to provide all of the services as prescribed by the government in their Fit for Future reforms. There is a detailed plan in place for delivering that, but the amount of work is significant, and so I think the next 6 months, or certainly the next 3 months, is key. Another piece of work that obviously is very important to the shareholders, effectively, is that the councils, is the governance arrangements that will exist. That is very active in minds, and I know feedback from the committee previously has been to understand naturally how that will evolve, and roles and responsibilities, etc. Part of the role that I have within this secondee arrangement is to work with with colleagues to draft the shareholder agreement. So this is a evolution of the inter-authority agreement that exists today, and that document will obviously will set out and articulate the relationship. But it's the key principles that sit behind that I think is very important for committee to understand and come along with that journey. So the intention is that we will workshop some of that for all members to be party to, so that we can discuss in detail how that might work in practice, and obviously seek and canvass feedback along the way. So kind of three strands. FCA approval process is a key milestone that needs to happen. Hiring staff is also key to resourcing the company, dealing with the governance arrangements and ensuring that from the point of operation, the shareholder arrangements are very clear and well understood, and both parties are satisfied with how this will move forward. I'll probably pause there, Chair, because I think that's hopefully a fairly comprehensive update in terms of where we've got to, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And I think I'll just have some comments I'll add for, excuse me, for bring members in. I think on a meta level, I think I remain impressed by sort of the speed and the quality of work that's been being undertaken at the moment. Although my other reflection is, as we are now sort of transitioning into more of a full-time approach across the WPP, with this now being a fully, hopefully, FCA accredited organisation by the time we go through the process, we are beginning to take that sort of compare and contrast between actually what is possible in the future with a full-time, fully professional setup managing our investments, what we have at the moment. And this is no, this is not to be negative about any work that's been gone on hitherto, but it's actually just seeing the increased potential for the performance of WPP and the assets under management from next April. I think is quite exciting. I think the actual the whole initiative is very exciting, and I would say that as I'm a big supporter of it for the last 12 months. I think just to say to members, I think Rob Lamb is a very impressive individual that we've appointed. He comes from he comes from a background in investment management, mostly in public markets. He is also a fintech platform founder. Also, and this is as probably was of much greater salience for some of the pension funds and authorities further west we go. He's actually a native Welsh speaker. He grew up went to the same school as Joanne. That was not part of the appointment process, but I think actually we tick a number of boxes. And thirdly, just to say congratulations to both Alex and to David for the secondment opportunity they've got. I think the reality is, I mean, the WPP Investments does not have an office yet. So the reality is, I think Andrew and I have spoken about this at length. I'm not seeing too much of a break in terms of day-to-day, week-to-week output and engagement with the staff here, both working from home and in the office. I think we'll cross that bridge when it comes to it in January about actually the physical dimensions of the new organisations being set up, and indeed whether either of them are still in that seconded position in the new year. But again, that is something for us to deal with when we come to it. But I think my reflection is, I think actually there's an awful lot of work has gone on, and I think people in Swaffham and this fund actually can take a sense of pride that the direction of travel for the new organisation, we've had a significant hand in shaping it. So I think I'm very pleased to relax with the fact that looking at the personnel involved, including Andrew, as an interim board member, that we can still take a key role in pushing this agenda forward. Now, David, I saw your hand up. Anybody else? Because I'll take you first if you do, but you don't. So, David, over to you.
No, it's very helpful, Alex, just to say in the report and the background as ever, giving the detail. I suppose the two things really. One is the sort of slight concern that the drawing in significant personnel input, if you like, from this pension fund might have a detrimental effect on us. I'm reassured by some of your comments, Chair, but also, your own perspectives that you feel you can manage this comfortably. And I suppose there's also a part of that, is it better to be inside, involved in it, rather than outside and actually responding to it? So I welcome your perspective on that one very quickly. Just to reinforce that, it would be helpful to come back to us with sort of proposed governance arrangements as they start to form. so that we're not presented with a fait accompli. I'm sure that isn't going to be the case, but, you know, I'm putting it out there. And thirdly, I think it would be quite helpful to perhaps schedule in an opportunity for us to meet the new Chief Executive, Rob Lamb, at some time, not necessarily the next Audit Committee meeting, but, sorry, Pensions Committee meeting, but at a subsequent one so that we, if you like, can prepare for that. Thank you.
Okay, I'll come in on those points. I think I've already discussed with Rob about him coming to this meeting at some point. Obviously, we're likely to have an extraordinary meeting in November to sign off the budget, and then the normal quote-unquote meeting in December, which is when I was going to propose to invite him. I am conscious, though, that having spoken to him, as I'm bombarding him with very, very helpful information and thoughts and comments quite frequently, I'm very conscious of the fact that the sprint to get the FCA, all those ducks lined up in the next couple of weeks, is quite an endurance. So whether we can get him to come in December or not, but I completely agree with you. The other points I would make: the governance, actually, as we start to unpick it, is likely to be slightly more complicated than I think we went into the process envisioning it to be, and this is largely because of the fact that we are both, as shareholders, we are 100% owners of the organisation, but then we also benefit from advice from the organisation because of the changes in the Fit for the Future review in terms of the provision of investment advice. So actually we'll probably have another layer of governance that covers us both as owners and as recipients, and they will have to be different governance structures to govern those activities, which is right and proper anyway, but now we are entering into FCA territory. These things have to be completely watertight before anything is signed off. I think Betty's got a hand up. I'll take that interjection. Then Alex, if you'd like to reply to David, then I'll finish off with Andrew for his reflections on what is about to happen to us.
Yeah, I expect that it'll be the administrating authority is actually the owner, whereas the pension fund committee is the client, if you will. So that's already a separation. But I completely agree that it is better to be in the room where it happens, so to speak, or to quote actually another pool, something from senior person, another pool, it's better to help shape the services that you would then want to hire. Because if you don't have a choice, make sure that they're ones you want to hire by being the drawback. So it's probably worth even any diversion of resources or being a bit stretched a bit thin short term to make sure we get what we want to hire.
I completely agree. Alex.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose not looking to duplicate what has already been said, the resource impact is obviously clear consideration for us, and I did make this comment earlier in the item, but just to reiterate that given my role, particularly with the project since its inception at the start of this year, I don't foresee a significant change in that arrangement other than the formalities of a secondment, I guess. The time I spend and ensure I'm committing to the pension fund is obviously is paramount, given that is my employer, and I've made those commitments to Andrew. We are considering what interim provision we might need to make to buffet that. But given that we have a broader team, you've obviously heard from Lewis today for the first time, I think, with Joe's role and a team behind it, I think we're well equipped to manage. I won't wish to speak for David. He may want to add some comments himself here, but David McFadden obviously came in just under a year ago now with a remit to oversee the investment and the finance function of the fund. So that was to provide ultimately me with that direct support, but also to support Lewis and Lisa, who's online, and Fiona as well within the investment and finance team. And a lot of David's time has been spent focusing on shaping the pooling arrangements even before the kind of direction of travel. And so David's capacity reflects the kind of role he has more directly around investments. And it's just so happened, and I said it at the time, we were fortunate to attract somebody with industry experience in this space that actually has offered a lot in terms of insight, perspective, value to the discussion. And so I think that the role with the investment secondee in particular, now specifically now that he's had an opportunity to understand the way we work, adds a lot to the direction of travel. So I'd probably stop there from a resource perspective. I understand the question, but hopefully that's reassuring. But I don't know, David, if you've got anything to add, or Andrew, I guess, a senior member of the team.
Thank you. So, David, if you'd like to say anything, you have the option to. You don't have to. No, fine. That's the officer. That's the type of officer I appreciate. But moving on to another officer I appreciate quite highly, Andrew. Just get your reflections on this before we move on.
Thank you. And I think as we've touched upon, understanding the role of the shareholder as the council and the recipient of the services is key. And by having people who can help shape that, and we have been shaping that all the way along, is a much more efficient way. And we'd like to get something that really suits us, rather than something that maybe is a bit more generic. So it's important, I think, we do that. I also pay compliment to the team. This is very much a team effort. The whole team have pulled together to make this happen. It's been very busy in the last 12 months and responding to the consultation, all of those things on there. And the team are really pulling together to enable Alex and David to fill these seconded roles on there. And I echo comments, we'll get Rob in to meet me, but he's rather busy at the moment doing the FCA bits and pieces. And myself and my fellow directors, we're very clear our role is in this transition phase to get the company up and running. We will hand over that baton as soon as possible. So our role is very a short-term focus, but it is critical to keep the pace up, which we're all doing.
Thank you very much for that, Andrew. In which case, then, if everyone's happy with that discussion, can I draw members' attention to recommendations? That's paragraph 7.1 on page 265. So it's recommended that the Pension Committee note the content of this report as well as the respective appendices. Are people happy to note that? Fantastic. Moving on to item number 10 then. Now, David, you are doing this one, aren't you? Having missold you earlier on. Right, so this is the risk register update report that went to the local pension board. This starts on page 287. I need a comfort break, so actually, David here, if that David rattles through the report before I come back, can you please chair the rest of the item? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Interim Chair. Hopefully this is another report which will allow members to sleep safely in their beds, like the previous one. This is a report that was presented to the local pension board on the 30th of July, presenting it here for your information. And this covers a quarterly review of the pension fund strategic risk register. For this quarter, we only covered the strategic risks for the pension board in line with the way that we cover the risk register. We previously covered the entire risk register on April 29th at their previous meeting. At a high-level summary, there's only been one change to the scoring of any strategic risk since the last time the strategic risks were presented. And I'll come to that in a second. As a reminder, as outlined in 3.2, we do use a scoring system framework to shape how we look at the risks to the fund, and that combines the likelihood of a risk occurring with the impact of that risk if it did occur. And again, we show the detail of how that's done in Appendix 1. And again, as a reminder, we look at initially the inherent risk. So what would the risk be to the fund if we didn't do anything about it? But more important to us is the residual risk, which is the risk that we feel that remains once we put in mitigating factors in place. So that's just a reminder. There was a theme for this quarter's risk review, which is investment risk. There were 4 investment risks in particular, which I'll come on to when we look at Appendix 2, which is the risk register itself. But as I say, only one of those has actually changed in terms of, only one strategic risk had its score changed, and that was SR7, which I'll come on to. As I say, investment risks have been chosen for this quarter as the theme, really because we hadn't done it before, but also because of the degree of, let's call it macro level political and geopolitical uncertainty. I think possibly we could say that every quarter, to be honest, but in particular, we felt it was appropriate to cover investment risk. So I'll just very briefly look at the actual strategic risks, which is in Appendix 2. I am going to mention SR1, which is the very first strategic risk, even though it's not an investment risk, but just to highlight, because it was mentioned in Joe's administration report, and actually the chair highlighted it as well, there was a desktop exercise or tabletop exercise conducted around business continuity and other aspects there. I guess initially, because of the Chief Information Security Officer sort of moving on, that might have encouraged us to increase the risk there. But actually, because of the positive outcome of that tabletop exercise, that hasn't happened. We're happy to retain the risk at the level that we previously had it. I will just mention strategic risk number 7, and again, that is that macroeconomic and geopolitical influences impact the market value of the pension fund's investments. As I say, we decreased the likelihood of that from a 3 to a 2, not necessarily because there are decreasing geopolitical or macroeconomic impacts, but just because of the very good position that the fund is in, and therefore how that might affect us. And I should just mention in the narrative on the right-hand side of SR7 that in 24-25, our fund's overall absolute performance was ranked second among the peer group of 61 LGPS funds within the PIRC league table analysis. So again, that's very pleasing. It doesn't necessarily, some funds have different objectives, they have different risk profiles, but nonetheless, it's a good start. So I'm going to conclude there. The chair did subliminally hint that I should rattle through. Hopefully I've done that, and I'll pause there for questions, Chair.
And I made it back in time. Thank you very much, David M. Any questions or queries from anyone around the table? David W.
Sorry, it was just, I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I guess in looking at the risks, and particularly SR7 you referred to, you will also be looking at the kind of reports that are coming in from what we saw earlier from Lewis and from Ethan that would actually sort of, if you like, give you a level of external assurance as well.
I think yes is the short answer, David, but yes.
Excellent. If everyone's happy otherwise, can I ask members to look at page recommendation 5.1 on page 289, and that is that it says the local pension board, I'm presumably asking us to note it. This is eagle-eyed, I didn't go through the papers properly. This is to us, they're not the pension board. Is it the same paper that went to the pension board that has come to the committee? Yes. So essentially, it's basically, yeah, so 5.1 is that number 1, that we note the updated risk register and the updates implemented during the quarterly review, to comment on any key risks highlighted as part of the quarter's risk and theme review and suggest potential areas for consideration as part of next quarter's review. So on point 1, we're all happy, yeah. I think if anybody does have any potential areas for consideration as part of next quarter's review, you can contact Alex and David separately to add that to the list. Okay, moving on then. Item number 11, a similar theme. This is the updated risk management approach. Again, I presume this is report to local pension board, but it is in fact coming to us. David, I believe you doing this again? Yep.
Yes, I am. Thank you. And again, I'll try and be quick. And you're correct. This is coming to you for information. It's the exact report that went to the pension board on 30th of July. So in the spirit of actually what you've just said, this is really about continuous improvement. There's some proposals in here to hopefully help us continue to focus more on the right things, provide a clearer picture to the board committee and other stakeholders, and enable better oversight. What this report here in front of you does is go through what we're proposing and why, and also seek feedback on what we're proposing. We did receive support from the board to implement the changes outlined, but obviously it would be good to receive that same support from the pension committee if warranted. The reason really we're doing this now is it's one of the key objectives outlined in the business plan. We said we'd review and refresh the fund's existing risk management policy. And as part of this review, we have conducted a review of the broader risk management framework. And just to touch on resourcing point from the previous item, I should definitely acknowledge the considerable effort that Lewis Gray has put into this. Really, most of what I'm presenting is his work, so hopefully that demonstrates the breadth within the team. The changes are also timely given the work that we're currently undergoing to ensure that we remain compliant with the Pensions Regulator General Code of Practice. And as I'm sure you know, that places a very strong emphasis on the role of risk management as part of scheme governance. So under paragraph 4, at a high level, we're proposing enhancements in 4 key areas. So that's the risk scoring matrix and how we evaluate risks. Secondly, a reframing of the categories of risks that we look at. Thirdly, a further embedding of key risk indicators within the framework. And then finally, and I think importantly, some additional components and presentational changes to the risk register to make it more impactful. I always find these documents very tricky to read. They tend to have a lot of detail, a lot of information. So we're hoping that the new changes proposed will make it more impactful and easier for members to read. The only detail I was going to go into on those 4 items today, but happy to take questions, is in paragraph 7, which is embedding of key risk indicators, because probably not something that we've particularly focused on before. I would describe key risk indicators as early warning signs of increasing risk in exposure. They're sort of like the seismological equipment that governments and other agencies use around the world to detect tremors that potentially might warn of earthquakes to come. So they really can help us proactively manage the risks that we see before they potentially materialize into significant issues. And we've shown some examples in paragraph 7.2 of just what example KRIs might be. So for example, in the cyber attack world, which is obviously very topical, we might be looking at the number of phishing attempts, downtime of critical systems, etc. They're only early warning indicators, and they wouldn't necessarily protect us, but they do enable us to focus on the right things at the right time, and as I say, be more proactive. So I think I'm just going to leave it there, Chair, just to allow plenty of time for questions. But as I say, this is an evolving approach to risk management. It isn't suggesting that what we have been doing to date hasn't been robust, but we want to update some of these components as mentioned in the report. And as I say, hopefully it means a clearer and more impactful report for yourselves as stakeholders and also the pension board. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, David. I think my immediate reflection, I mean, this is a good way of approaching it by actually asking us to sort of kick around the direction of travel, and then obviously to iterate this between us and the board before it comes to us for final sign-off. I think anything we can do to make these types of registers more readable and to be a bit more relevant, I think, to some of the activities that we're doing. I think I'm very much in favour of that. But that says more about my personality, I think. David.
Well, thank you, Chair. And in fact, I was going to pick up on the points at 7 and the key risk indicators, because I think that's actually very helpful. I think it's actually helpful both in terms of giving us, as you say, some indications. I suppose 2 points I'd make. Firstly, it's going to be important that it is things that can be measured, and we're not trying to invent something or something that's too difficult or adding too much. That's the first observation. And the second is that then obviously I think this gives good support when we go to audit inquiries of management to to actually demonstrate that we know what we're saying and we can validate the response that we've been giving. So I would just point out that that's a helpful thing that we can include. And yeah, I think it's very much support the direction of travel, and particularly the also picking up on the increased numbers of areas of risk to be a bit more differentiated so that we can get greater assurance. Hopefully this will also stand us in good stead as we move towards the pooled arrangements and the new company, and I'm sure it will help influence how they also look at risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Sage as ever. Betty.
Yeah, I was going to raise the same point that you raised, David, but maybe more directly. Is will the pool adopt something similar to this? Because as they take over more, I think it's really important that we have, risk reports and risk monitoring that kind of dovetails so that it's relevant. And I particularly really like your inappropriate long-term investment strategy risk and deviation from benchmarks and things. But then I don't really see very many people saying has to consider the actuarial discount rate, because everybody's so concerned about how you did versus that benchmark or that index or something like that. Even if you lost less than they did, doesn't actually help you meet your discount rate. So I really like that. So it'd be really important to get this adopted, or maybe adapted, expanded, whatever the right word is, for the pool.
I completely agree. I mean, the CRO is not one of the appointments that is being seconded into at the moment, but like referring back to the previous item but one, the fact that Alex and David are both going to be in there working on this, hopefully we can have some kind of influence. I think, again, we've had a conversation that I think everything is off the table, or on the table, whichever the right way. The expression is looking at some of the structures and processes that have been developed by the WPP as a JGC over the last decade, that we will not be hidebound just to continue with things are as they are at the moment. So this is a very good reflection to throw into the mix. You may.
One more point. I think it's important to also remember that WPP is not the only pool that's having to rethink, expand, reimagine how it does things. Even those existing pools, which are the FCA regulated, only did a limited scope of things, and they're having to redo the shareholder agreements now for expanded roles and things like that. Rethink their own governance arrangements. Hire people to do this advisory work. Think, oh yeah, their liabilities. Gosh, we didn't think about that. So you're not alone. You've got everybody's in somewhat of a similar boat. So just want to encourage people.
That's a very good point. I think I have had this conversation with Rob, actually, but there is actually no formal structure to bring the pools together unless people show some initiative, but maybe that's something we can pick up offline. So thank you again for that. If members are happy to proceed on the basis that David, and again, I would definitely endorse what your suggestion, David. When are you proposing that this will come back to the committee for sign-off?
We think, well, depending on agenda time, by the end of this year.
So that's the December meeting.
Yeah.
Might it be useful then, I'm just thinking more work for everyone, that when you have something a bit more, once you have the beginnings of a draft of what you want to bring in December, whether we could find some extra time outside of the formal committee meeting, and it could be that it makes sense having potentially a joint meeting with the board to actually go through this in a bit more detail, to actually kick it around a bit so we can knock off any lumps before it comes to a final decision making in December. So if people are happy with that suggestion, I'll take that up with Alex and David separately. And on that basis then, again, if I can draw members' attention to recommendations, which is paragraph 11.1 on page 302. So we're asked to note the contents of the report, to comment on the updates made to the fund's risk management framework, and provide support to proceed with the enhancements proposed, incorporating feedback received. I think we're all happy to, I think that we've done that, or we've started to do that at least, so people are happy to agree those items. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Item number 12 is back to Joanne. This is elected member training, starting on page 315.
Thank you, Chair. This is quite a brief report, but this report just sets out the training logs and training already undertaken by members for 25-26, and also the annual training programme of events scheduled for the forthcoming year. If there are any other events that members would wish to attend, then please let me know. I just want to take this opportunity as well just to mention about the LGA conference that's being held in January. I asked for interest a few weeks ago, and this has now been booked. So if you did express an interest of attending that, you should have received an email informing that your places are now booked for that conference. That's great. And just a reminder as well, I circulated an email about the LAPFF annual conference, which is being held in Bournemouth in December. So if anyone would like to attend that, if you can let me know as soon as possible, I can get those places booked. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. If anybody hasn't signed up for the LGA Governance Conference, it is in Cardiff this year. I will be a star performer. That might be something that makes you run away at a rate of knots. But the fact of the matter is, actually, the fact it is in Cardiff makes it cheaper, yes, that's correct, but it makes it much more manageable for us to go there. This will be the fourth one I've been to now, and I think actually year on year I understand more of it, so I'm getting more out of it. Also, just to say what a good Boy Scout I am, I'm going to the LGA on Wednesday to redo my pension fundamentals training course day one, and hopefully I'll understand a bit more now than I did 3 years ago, which wouldn't be difficult. Any further points anyone would like to make on what Joanne set out? In which case then, members, paragraph 4.1 on page 315, it's recommended that we note the annual training programme included in Appendix 2, and if we have any training needs, topics, etc., we can refer them back to Joanne. But if people are happy with that, I'll take that as read. Yeah, fantastic. Item number 13. This will involve some fancy footwork, which I'm expecting Alex to talk us through. I am merely the puppet in this one. But item number 13 is the triennial valuation update, which starts on page 321.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I will present the public aspect of this document. But supplementing the report is a background paper prepared by Heinz Robertson as the scheme actuary, and Barry Dodds has joined us online this afternoon. Barry will certainly cover that background paper, as we've said, under an exempt item, given that there's quite a bit of confidential material within that would not necessarily be helpful if it was in the public domain. However, given that there is a public interest in the triennial evaluation exercise, I intend to give a high-level overview of where we are today and an outline of where we expect to be by the end of this financial year in March. And as I say, then we will move to an exempt session to discuss the detail before dealing with the recommendations.
But just to clarify for my own headspace, if nobody else is, Alex is going to talk through the high-level aspects of this report publicly. I am then going to read the ditty that will allow us to go into private session. We will do the private session. I will then unditty ourselves to go back into public session so we can take a vote on what we need to take a vote on. We then have to go back into private session, but we don't need the ditty. Is that correct? Right, over to you.
And on that note, just to reassure members, this is purely for noting only. It's an update for information as to where we are in the process. You'll recall in June there was a recommendation paper to approve the assumptions, which are effectively the input into the process, which drives some of what you will see in this item together with the kind of direction of travel. So hopefully, procedurally, that makes sense, but let's run through the detail and happy to take questions. So, as members will be aware, the LGPS is subject to a triennial valuation exercise, effectively a stock take on where we are in terms of funding those liabilities with the assets that we have available. As you're aware, the primary responsibility of the fund is to pay pensions as they fall due. The valuation is always set on a 3-year basis using 31st of March data, and this valuation uses 31st of March 2025. So we're sort of 6 months, just over 6 months into this process now, which typically lasts the full year. And as I say, we round out the process in March, usually in the March committee next year, where the committee will approve all of the policy documentation around funding strategy and the rates and adjustment certificate, which sets out how our 57 scheme employers' contribution rates will be affected for the forthcoming 3 years between 2026 and 2029. Today, what I'm updating you on is where the fund is at a whole level, so this isn't at the granular level of individual employer circumstances, and as you'll note in the caveats around the data here, just because the fund is in a healthy position, and I'm pleased to say it is, that doesn't necessarily represent the picture for all employers, and so we need to work through that process before we reach those conclusions. Key messages to note are, and probably as expected, given a lot of the noise around this industry over the last 12 months or so, funding level for the Greater Gwent Pension Fund has improved significantly, 37% increase from where it was reported in 2022, which is, I think, a great outcome for the fund, great recognition on the part of the Pension Committee who have set that investment strategy and the discipline, I guess, around the way in which we funded those liabilities, but also to note and recognise the contribution and the significant contribution of our employers who continue to make good on those employee contribution rates that we set, despite the financial challenges they face elsewhere. So that significant improvement is obviously very positive. What has driven that? You heard in the earlier items from quarterly performance that performance over the intervaluation period, i.e. over the last 3 years, has been exceptional, to be honest, and well ahead of what we'd assumed it would be or might have been in 2022. So that's again a credit to the performance of the assets that we have managed on our behalf. But there's also been another factor at play, which is the kind of outlook in the long term, and I'll talk a little bit about those future expectations. But just to say that the future expectation on where investment returns might be has had a significant material impact on the projected cost of the liabilities of the scheme in the long term. And that swing has really contributed to that significant funding improvement. So we can talk a bit about that detail over the next sort of 10 or 15 minutes, I guess. On page 321, moving into 322, is really just a summary of that funding improvement that I've just talked about, covering both 2022 valuation and 25 as a comparator. You can see the blue bar, which represents the assets of the scheme. In 2022, it slightly lagged the projected liability obligation, but in 2025, as I've just explained, now significantly outweighs it. So there is a funding surplus, as quoted by Hymans, is around £1.1 billion. That reflects that sort of 34% excess funding over and above your 100% target. I mentioned that, so the reason for a funding level is a bit of a red herring in some aspects. It has to be reported, and therefore Hymans have to produce a funding level. It is driven by the input, as I mentioned at the start. The committee agreed to the assumptions that would be baked into the model at the meeting in June. We did take a prudent view of certain aspects of that to try and build in some of that buffer to ensure that we weren't taking a too imprudent view at the time. But as I say, it's subject to where asset values are versus assumption on liability at any point in time. If you were to calculate that funding level today, it would likely look different to what we've reported as of 31st of March, but nonetheless, we're required to do so, and so that does often get the headline message. What I think is important context for committee, and something that we will discuss with our employers in due course, is the driver of that change in funding level, because, as I say, it's important to understand what is causing this, and therefore how that might reverse or change again over time. And that's going to be split between known events and future expectations. I'm sure Barry will cover some of this in more detail as part of his presentation, but essentially, as defined on the bottom of page 322, the known event is effectively the actual experience between 22 and 25. So that is how have things actually materialised versus what we assumed. And I mentioned investment performance. We assumed a minimum investment return of 4.3% over a 20-year period. That investment return, as we heard in earlier items, has been significantly higher. And so that has had a real benefit on the funding position. But equally, we know that throughout the last 3 years, inflation, and particularly CPI, Consumer Price Index, is fluctuated significantly, and at one stage was a double-digit figure. Why does that matter? Well, LGPS benefits both the accrued benefit, but also the benefit in payment is linked to CPI using a September valuation. And as I just said, I think there was a one financial year where there was a 10.1%, I recall, and another that was close to 7% annualised increase. So actually, in isolation, the impact of that additional benefit cost could have resulted in the fund having a worse funding position over 3 years if you weren't to consider that longer-term future expectation. So I think that's an important point to make, that what was in the last 3 years, what we were able to observe, is a bit of a mixed bag. Generally, the assumptions have tracked pretty well, but we've seen the impact of one assumption being CPI that has actually had quite a detrimental impact on funding level. The second aspect is your future expectations. That's why we appoint our scheme actuary. It's their role to, their expertise is to effectively help and assist the fund in making reasonable assumptions about what the future may involve, and that will look at things like, again, in future investment returns, the expectation on liability costs into the long term, but also sort of more nuanced points of consideration around sort of demographic changes. How will the membership evolve over that period of time? Will people live longer and draw on the pension fund for longer? Will they live shorter? And actually that could have morbidly a benefit to the pension fund from a funding perspective. So future expectations are important, but clearly they are subject to greater uncertainty and change. And I think it's really where we've seen that 37% increase in our funding level, the real benefit of that has come from the change in the future that has been observed. As you know, inflation sits around 4% today broadly across major economies. That means that, in simple terms, you can just about earn 4% on cash, which is a risk-free investment if you were to put that into a savings account. So naturally, you would assume that if you're taking risk in an equity portfolio, you would expect a return over and above cash. And so the future expectation for investment returns is higher. And as a result, that is doing a lot of heavy lifting, both on the amount of assets you'll have available to pay pensions in 2 decades' time, but also the cost of funding those liabilities over that same period. So future expectations has had a material impact on the improved funding level as reported. And as I say, Barry will cover more of the detail. Just to kind of round out, because also I'm conscious that the fund as a whole doesn't necessarily represent all of our employers. We don't take a one-size-fits-all approach, as we've communicated to you previously. The underlying 57 employers in this scheme have very different characteristics and different funding objectives. You've got your 5 big local authorities. They're obviously precepting authorities. They're able to they have tax-raising powers. They intend to exist in the scheme for a very long time, but also they are open to new joiners. So there are new people who start working employment in the councils today that could benefit from this pension scheme in decades to come. But alongside that, you have housing associations, and they all have very different priorities and objectives. Some have made decisions historically to close off the scheme to new joiners, so there's a smaller concentrated pot of a sort of concentrated proportion of the workforce that is dwindling over time, and meeting those liability costs is more of a strain. That's just one example. There are lots of other employers that maybe participate in the scheme for a short period of time. They provide catering or cleaning services to schools, to the leisure trusts, etc. And so their objectives for being in the scheme are quite different to a local authority, for example. With that in mind, I just wanted to demonstrate this on page 324. So what you can see here, that this chart is effectively representing, the blue dots represent each of the employers in the fund that we have today, that 57 I talked about. The solid red bar across the middle of that axis demonstrates the funding level of 134%, as we've reported. And then, so across the x-axis, you can see in a logarithmic style, it's kind of bunched the employers in our scheme by assets share. So, as you'd imagine, the 5 local authorities dominate the bulk of the 4.8 billion of assets in this scheme, and hence they are to the right-hand side. And because they are a significant contributor of the scheme, I don't know what the percentage would be, but probably 90% plus, it's fairly expectant that those councils track the overall funding level pretty consistently. But as you can see, and we don't actually know the detail of the names at this stage, there is an outlier that is slightly below that level. So again, it represents that even on the larger scale, the fund level doesn't necessarily represent all of our employers. Looking to the left-hand side, you can see some of the much smaller employers in the scheme that have a much smaller share of the assets, but actually there are half a dozen of those that are below the 100% funding level. So there's a real disparity in that case. Now, there will be some good reason for that. Again, Barry may have some insight to share. Usually it relates to the period in time in which these employers are in the scheme. It might be that they've only joined midway through this current intervaluation, and so actually they haven't had the benefit of all those investment returns, or the asset share they have available hasn't generated the returns that maybe the councils have benefited from. But likewise, the other side of that graph shows that there are a couple of employers that are over 200% funded. So clearly there's some structural long-term benefits to those employers in the scheme today. The point I would leave here, and I say Barry may cover some more of the detail, is that the next phase of this project beyond the funding level at a whole fund is to now get into the individual detail. We expect employer results to be available for officer consumption and discussion in the next fortnight or so. We will host early November an employer forum meeting where we will invite along the employers to this chamber to discuss fund level, but also have an opportunity to discuss their own individual circumstances, at which time we will set, or we will indicate what the contribution rate that they may pay from April next year will be, and obviously there will be some form of discussion around that at the time. Page 325 really is just a summary of what I've said. It outlines at a high level the timetable. We're pleased we're making very good progress on the valuation. Draft results as of September, presenting to the committee in October is a good step forward. We've got engagement with the councils at the end of this week to talk to them about where we are in the process. As I said, the remainder of the employers will follow this month and early next. The other part of the valuation process that the pension committee need to be mindful of is the policy that sits around this process, so how we fund those liabilities. We have a funding strategy statement already exists today, and that deals with some of the issues that we've experienced over the last few years, such as cessations and exits from the scheme. So that needs to be reviewed. We'll need to consult with our employers on the changes there as it relates and affects their existence in the scheme. We hope to do that sort of either side of the end of the calendar year, with a view to return to committee in March with a kind of final proposal that reflects feedback from the consultation, review of the local pension board, consistency with regulations, advice from Hymans, etc., for a final sign-off. And on the basis all of that is agreed, the employers will be given, will obviously be informed then of their changing contribution rates from April next year. That probably is as far as I need to go, and I'm happy if there are any questions at this stage before we move to exempt session for Barry to discuss his report.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Alex. Any questions specifically on what Alex has set out? If not, thank you very much. In which case, members, if you'll indulge me, can members please agree the exclusion of the press and public from the meeting, as presentations and meeting papers are not for publication, because in accordance with paragraphs 12 and 14 of Part 4 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended by the Access to Information Variation Order Wales of 2007, it contains information about a particular individual and information relating to the financial and business affairs of particular persons, including the council, and in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemptions outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Are people happy to proceed on that basis? Fantastic. Thank you very much. Bob, I'm happy. Excellent. I didn't say that. That was fantastic. So thank you very much with your patience there, everyone. We're now back in public session. I think, David, if you had a question you'd like to ask Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to try and understand that as a pensions committee, what we have to approve, we have to approve the triennial evaluation, but the extent to which, if you like, we have to endorse the individual elements of increases by employer, or whether this is something that just follows on.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a good question. As I say, I think the focus of the pension committee is on the process, and therefore examples as to date are the agreeing the assumptions in June, which is the input to the model that has got us to where we are today. The Pension Committee obviously oversee and effectively own the policies, such as the funding strategy statement. So the Pension Committee are responsible for setting out how it intends to fund liabilities with advice it receives from the officers and from Hymans as a scheme actuary. But it's not necessarily responsible for the output or the results that as in what the employer contribution results look like. That is very much an output of the model. Obviously, there are parameters in place and sensitivities around that which we're mindful of. And I think part of the commitment to a consultation on the policy that the fund and the Pension Committee ultimately pursue ensures that we canvass that feedback from our employers before any decisions are taken. So there is a process, but it's very much the Pension Committee tasked with ensuring that that's undertaken properly as opposed to worrying too much about the output in its decision making.
I hope that tallied with your previous understanding of the matter. So, if everyone's happy, no more questions, no more queries, can I point members to page 326 and recommendation at 9.1. It is recommended that the Pension Committee notes the progress reported during the 2025 triennial valuation stage. Everyone happy to acknowledge that? Excellent. That's done. Right, agenda item number 14, date of the next meeting. Well, the date of the next scheduled meeting is the 15th of December 2025. As I've mentioned already, there will be an extraordinary meeting in November to sign off the annual report and accounts, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible on that one. Agenda item number 15 is we're jumping back into the exclusion of press and public. Excuse me, but I'm not going to read out the statement as before. But for the same reasons as previously stated, could members state whether they agree to the exclusion of the press and public? Fantastic, thank you very much. We'll turn the machine